Hi everyone, I'm Kate, and before we get into the amazing collaboration that I have for you today, I wanted to mention a couple of things. Kristen and I filmed this collaboration for a variety of platforms, and the conversation ended up being a lot longer than we had anticipated, like 2 hours and 15 minutes. But I asked, and you guys voted for one long video, so that's how I'm attempting to post this today. As long as my internet and computer allow me to post such a big video, you will get the whole thing at once. Settle in, grab a drink, get comfortable, because this is a long conversation. Now, having said that, everything that we talk about in this video can be taken so much deeper. We go through each of the 7 deadly sins, we talk about a bunch of different divine beings, we talk about different archetypal wounds like the witch wound and sisterhood wounds. All of these things can be taken so much deeper, and if that's something you're interested in doing, you might want to check out my 90-day group shadow work program. We're going to walk through the 7 deadly sins, we're going to deep dive into the shadow, we're really going to heal a lot of the shame that comes up for women especially, that really keeps us from stepping into our power. So if you get to the end of this conversation and you are interested in going deeper, all that information is in the link at the link below. Now, you may know that I was sick for almost all of October, so I apologize that my voice sounds a little bit funky in a few spots. I don't know how Kristen and I managed to film this on a day that I was actually feeling up to it. We did, but my voice wasn't 100%. So I apologize for that in advance. If you want to know more about Kristen, all her information is below. If you want to know more about my program, all the information is below. And like I said, get comfortable, because this is a long one.
Hit us up with an intro to get us started, Kristen.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Today we're having an incredible discussion about the 7 deadly sins and what all of that really means. So I will kick us off with an introduction for those of you who don't know me. My name is Kristen Ramezzana. I am the Underworld Queen on Instagram and TikTok. I host a podcast called Awaken the Witch. And my mission here in this lifetime is all about helping people dive into their darkness, healing the darkest parts of themselves, and allowing themselves to really be liberated, embodied, and abundant as fuck. And so today we're going to take you through a journey with the incredible Kate Olson, and you're going to learn so much about what we really house within our shadow and within our psyche around the 7 deadly sins. Do you want to take the floor?
Introduce myself quick. Yeah, so I'm Kate. I am the Mystic in the Woods on Instagram and YouTube, where YouTube is where I do most of my content. And my work has sort of accidentally become very much about the intersection of shadow work and deconstruction, because as I've kind of said before, if any of you follow me on any of my platforms, that we all sort of swim in the pool of Christianity, even if we aren't Christian, weren't raised Christian, or were raised in some other tradition altogether. If you live in the Western world, then this shit affects you, whether you think it does or not. And I think I just saw something the other day about Sagittarius and how, like, the Sagittarius placements love a good system. And so the 7 deadly sins give us this system to really finish deconstructing all of that crap, and find our authenticity, because they act as a freaking map to point you directly to all the stuff that has been hidden from you or you've hidden from yourself.
I could not agree more. It's interesting too, because I think that these things lie on a spectrum. So when we grow up in extremely religious homes or have a lot of religious trauma, like, we kind of lean into unpacking this if it's something that we choose to, heal and move through. But when we don't grow up in those environments, it can be easy to assume that we are unaffected by all of this, and that couldn't be further from the truth. So I'm very excited to dive in and unpack this with everybody today.
Well, even for me, so I was raised in a Christian home, but in I'm going to call it Christian light. Like we went to church occasionally. My mom talked about God, but only in like the loving way that I think it was probably meant to be talked about. So when I reached adulthood and I realized, I was afraid of the devil, and I was afraid of going to hell, and I was afraid of all these things, I'm sitting here going, where did this come from? How is this inside of me? And as I started expressing it to my parents, they're both looking at me like, we never taught you that. Like, if anything, they taught me the opposite, like, be yourself, go out into the world, and they lived these examples for me. So they're sitting here as confused as I am about how how this stuff is so deeply embedded and impacting my life, but here it is. So
I had a very similar experience where my dad doesn't believe in any of this. He grew up Catholic and was like, fuck that. So he's like, he never pushed anything on anybody. My mom tried to like, do the classic thing and just like bring us to Sunday school occasionally. So like it wasn't really in my life. And it was the same for me in terms of like her supporting my individuality. And like I tell this story all the time. Every time we'd, come home from school, if she was going to run errands, if we'd go to Barnes and Noble, she'd let me pick out like a book from the occult section. And she was like, don't you dare do any of these spells. And like she would accidentally project a little bit of that fear, but it was never because I was going to quote unquote go to hell or anything like that. So it's like there was never that programming, but there was still so much fear to unpack when I stepped into the spiritual and occult space. And it also blindsided me because I was like, what the fuck? I was allowed to buy witch books as a kid. Like, where is this wound coming from? And so it's everywhere though. It's everywhere in our society.
it really is. It's shocking actually to me to sit here and go, wow, I somehow internalized this idea that I have to be a good person by society's standards in order to go to heaven, or else I'm going to go to hell and burn for all eternity. Like that was never taught to me.
No, same here.
So.
And it's interesting too, though, because now that we understand the unconscious mind and the link that we have between our internal and external realities, we can look at it from the lens of like, okay, if we have all this programming around what it means to be a good person and all of this conditioning around all the things that are not acceptable when that's shown to us in the world, like this is bad, evil, dark, etc. So in the world, we pack that away and push it out of our sight. We do the same thing internally because of that link between our internal and external. So even if someone never directly told you that, X, Y, and Z is bad, evil, or wrong, we still see that everywhere as like subliminal messaging and conditioning. And we automatically pack that away in our shadow. And that's really destructive because if anyone watching this or listening to this knows anything about the shadow, when we ram shit in there, we literally throw it into the driver's seat so that it can take hold in a very unfavorable and an undesirable way later. So it literally, you're just giving all of the power to the parts of yourself that you hate the most. And there's another way to go about it.
Yes. And when people step into this, occult space or alternative spirituality space, if you don't finish deconstructing all that stuff, you just bring it with you and you give it a new name. So you bring it straight into your new magical practice, and you don't even know you're still looking through that lens. I can't tell you how many times I'm on Instagram or a podcast or something, and somebody says something and I go, yeah, that's the rapture. Or like, yeah, that's the Christian devil. Like you're just calling it something different.
I love that you're bringing this up because part of what blindsided me was like and I've talked a lot about my personal journey on my podcast and things, so I don't want to get too much into it, but it's layered. When you have a spiritual awakening, when you step into the spiritual or the occult space, there's layers to it. And so most people naively think, okay, I'm just going to come out as a witch or come out as a mystic and then like, boom, problem solved. No, wrong. If you continue on this path, you're going to hit so many other tower moments and other forks in the road. And so as I deepened my journey, at first it was like putting witch in my Instagram bio. And then I started talking about Hades in the underworld. And then I started talking about like entities and vampires. And then I started talking about demons. And it was like every level deeper was scary. But when I hit on demons, I actually was blindsided because some of the pushback I was getting were from people who were very awake in the spiritual community and even other occultists. And they were like, that's evil. And I was like, what? You do fucking blood magic and you think that me working with Belial is evil? Like what? And so it just showed me that when we are not actively diving into our unconscious mind and understanding the conditioning we still house, we drag it into the spiritual space. And in reality, you're sitting in the same space with the same restrictions and the same rules and the same fear, but you're ripping off the label that says religion and you're slapping up the label that says spirituality. Like that's not actually a different path. You're on the same path. You're just changing the label of it. And that's the entire issue. I firmly believe that people are not fully awake until you go to the depths of your shadow and decondition everything you've been told to believe so that you can form your own opinion. And I do this with demons all the time. When people come to me and they're like, but demons are evil and this and that, I'm like, we're going to stop you right there. Do you want to actually talk about this? I have some questions for you. Have you had a personal experience with them? Have you worked with them? Have you met people who work with them respectfully? Have you heard their perspectives? Because if you answer no to those questions, what you believe to be true about demons is not actually your belief. It is something that you're regurgitating from somewhere else. So therefore, this whole conversation is irrelevant until you decide to have your own experience with it. And obviously there's a safe and an unsafe way to do these things. But at the end of the day, being a true occultist or a true spiritualist or being fully fucking awake means taking full control over what you choose to believe and how you let that dictate your life.
Absolutely. Yes.
So on
And
that
it's
note, do you
easier
want to
said than done.
Oh yeah, like this is by no means like a, cakewalk, but it is really rewarding because it is extremely liberating, and I'm all about sovereignty and freedom, and I mean everywhere in my birth charts like you just fucking need freedom. And so like liberating myself and other people is so powerful because we don't even realize the shackles and the prisons that we carry with us from who we're told to be and what we're told to believe based on all of this conditioning that is not in your face. Like you're probably not ever going to drive down the highway and see a billboard around the 7 deadly sins. And maybe if you live in the Midwest you will, but like for the most part it's not going to be that in your face, which means that the shackles you carry are invisible, but that doesn't mean that they're not affecting you or that they're not there.
And that's exactly it, is that you don't even know they're there. You can't even see them unless you're looking. And I think that's what makes them especially insidious and sneaky and hard to break free of. Because if you don't know where to look, it's really hard to find it.
I couldn't agree more. So we're going to take you guys on a journey today. Do you want to kick us off with some history?
Yes. So before I do that, I'm going to make one disclaimer, which I don't like disclaimers generally. We're going to actually probably talk about that here in one of these sins, but I do think this one's important. So I just want to make clear that like literally everything I'm going to talk about has to do with Christianity, not Judaism. And I just want to make that clear because, all the Christian stories and myths and beings have their roots and seeds within the Jewish tradition. And everything that I'm going to talk about has to do with ancient Israelites or Canaanites or the Christian tradition and is in no way at all meant to be a comment on how those things impact current Jewish traditions. And so I just want to make that clear. I'm happy to poke holes at Christianity all day long because that's where I was born into. And, Christianity, there is a real Christian supremacy is a real thing in the Western world. But I just don't want anybody to think that this has anything to do with modern day Jewish traditions. I just think that's one disclaimer I do think is important.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
But yes, so I have a timeline. So the 7 deadly sins, the first place that we probably see this concept would actually be in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which is sort of dated to 90 to 100 CE. So it's actually probably one of the oldest Christian scriptures that we have. That was probably well read and well distributed, given how many copies of it we've found. And in there, they talk about the 7 powers. So these are like the climates, the things that can hold the soul back, essentially. They aren't necessarily presented as evil. They're just presented as things you have to work through. But the person who actually sort of created the 7 deadly sins would be Evagrius Ponticus. And I'm not even going to claim that I'm saying that correctly. But he was a Christian monk who somewhere sort of in 350, 399 CE came up with the 8 inner demons or the 8 evil thoughts in air quotes. And it's very likely, given that we know Mary's gospel was still in circulation at the time, he very likely got a lot of this from there. But this was a writing that was specifically for other Christian monks, not necessarily for just the general Christian population. And they were, again, sort of ways that the soul would get tripped up, where you would sort of, stumble and that it would cause you to sin, essentially. In about sort of, let's see, so then in the 3rd century CE is where we get St. Augustine and the original sin, which we're going to come back to. So I just kind of want to mention where that fits in here. And then 367, we have a bishop who I'm not even going to try and say his name, but I can put that like in the notes or the description of this somewhere. He is the one that actually put out an edict to destroy kind of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, as well as all these other ones. This is 367 that we're seeing. That those extra early Christian texts sort of officially like, nope, we're not gonna do those. And then, of course, in 590, we have the infamous Homily 33, given by Pope Gregory. And this is the one where he turned those 8. Okay, so here's where we're going to get into this again. So we have the 8 inner demons that Evagrius created. And Pope Gregory turned them into the 7 deadly sins, or the 7 cardinal vices, and attributed them to Mary Magdalene. And this was the same homily where he also branded her as a prostitute for the first time. So for anybody who's unfamiliar with the Gospel of Mary or Mary Magdalene outside of Christianity, there is no scriptural evidence that she was a prostitute. This was completely made up by Pope Gregory in 591. He just literally just decided that she was a prostitute, and the 7 demons that Jesus cast out of her must have been these 7 deadly sins.
That's a grand assumption to make.
It really is. It's a very big assumption. And when you're looking at all of the early Christian texts that didn't make it into the Bible, in combination with the ones that did, there are a handful of women that obviously had huge roles in the early Christian church, in Jesus's life. And the church had to do something with them. So they were so big that they couldn't be just removed from the Bible. But the church had to do something because we couldn't, at this time, we couldn't have women leading the church, which we're also going to come back to as we sort of move through the 7 deadly sins. But
yeah,
so that's
it's
kind of
wild.
how we get it.
It's wild. And I love that you laid out the timeline in that fashion, because we see that people create things on a whim and then just throw them out on a whim. And this is what's happened over and over. And we take these things and we're conditioned to carry them as if they are absolute truth. And then we go and we find out that these things have just been created kind of willy-nilly and discarded willy-nilly. And like they're so deeply ingrained in everything in our society. And they're just like, maybe this is a thing. Like it is mind-blowing when we look at it that way, especially how easily we've seen the people in power in the past just twist things to benefit them. So it's like, okay, we can't have women in power. We can't have women as powerful as men. So we're just going to paint them in a terrible light if we can't make them obsolete. And then we wonder why everything is the way it is in the world today. It's mind-blowing.
And it's important, in case you didn't get this from the timeline, everyone listening or watching, these are not from the Bible. Okay, the 7 deadly sins, not in the Bible.
Right.
I think it's an important distinction there, because the modern day Christians like to hold up the Bible and say, this is, the Christian tradition is supposed to be built on the Bible. There are other traditions that are built on other, I will make one claim about Judaism, but any Jewish person listening, feel free to correct me. They don't just have what is the Hebrew Bible, the Torah. They have all these other texts that their tradition is built on. And it's in my opinion, as an outsider, a much more living and deep tradition than what modern day Christianity is, because modern day Christianity holds up the Bible and says, this is the word of God. These are the things we need to do. Okay, well, the 7 deadly sins aren't in there. So
yeah. It's so wild when you do a little bit of digging and find out all of this is absolute nonsense.
Exactly. And then before we get into the sins themselves, I also just want to talk about the concept of sin really quickly, which, of course, in Hebrew and Greek, the words for sin amount more to sort of missing the mark than some huge transgression against God. So it's not like, oh, you did this thing and you basically went to war against God when you did that thing. Sin is just like, hey, you're human and you're supposed to hit the human target, and sometimes you miss. And in that missing, the soul can get tripped up and these kinds of things. In Mary's gospel, sin is very much about acting from a place of only ego as opposed to acting from a place of soul, because in Mary's gospel, we are both equally human and equally divine. And when we forget that we are equally divine and act only from our ego, then that is where sort of sin comes into the picture. I think that one of the there's lots of reasons Mary's gospel was ordered to be destroyed, but one of the main reasons is probably because, well, we don't have the first, I believe, 6 pages the pages we do have open with one of the disciples asking Jesus, "What is sin?" And he responds, "There is no such thing as sin." And he goes on to say, "You yourselves create sin when you act in accordance with the nature of adultery," which is this illegitimate mixing, this acting from a place of ego instead of soul. So even the concept of sin is a far more nuanced concept than, we'll just call it the church as an establishment
Mm-hmm.
has led us to believe over the centuries.
Well, right. And I mean, that just shows the agenda that was pushed because, like, if sin is missing the mark, because of course, everything lies on a spectrum. We talk about this a lot. You can be at one end, you could be at the other. This is how everything has become very polarized in the world today in terms of politics and spiritual views, etc. And then there's like a middle ground, and everyone's middle ground can be a little bit different, which means that there's no like, hard and fast right and wrong way to really go about anything. But either way, wherever you fall on that spectrum, at neither end exists like a fiery pit of eternal damnation. So, like, where the fuck did that come from?
Also not in the Bible. So that's its whole other
Right.
whole
And so
other
it's just like,
podcast and thing about where hell came from, but
yeah,
also
right.
not in the
Oh,
Bible. Yeah.
yeah. We'll have to do another one on that. But like, it's so fascinating when we start to look at these things because it's like, wow, the entire world for hundreds and thousands of years has been tricked into believing all of this fear-based bullshit. And that's not at all where we started, but that's how twisted and convoluted it has become.
Yeah. It's true. I mean, it's really insane when you start to get into it. And for me, my healing through all this has always been to start in the intellectual and then move it into, embodiment and healing it in the shadow and all these things. And so for me, uncovering all of this history and how all these things came to be has been like just dropping a bomb into my body.
Yeah.
What do
Yeah.
you mean that's not in the Bible? What do you mean that isn't like
Yeah. And for anyone listening, if you are also mind blown that maybe you haven't had a lot of exposure in your current life to this stuff, but still feel very traumatized by it or still feel like there's a lot to unpack, obviously, in addition to all of the conditioning that we experience in the world today, like every part of our society is heavily infiltrated by all of this, but we also can't forget about the past life piece. And so it is very common. I feel called to bring this up because it's very common to have had past lives where you were abused by religious people. I mean, the witch wound, if you were burned at the stake for being yourself, like, by people who were putting religion above everything, like that is also going to be where some of this charge comes from you. And so just know that if this is at any point like triggering or heavy, or if you're like blindsided by how much you're really resonating with what we're talking about, just know that there's more than just this life. And you may have had some heavy religious trauma, some witch wounding, and anything in between that is packed into your shadow. So you might not be consciously aware of it because the conscious mind's only roughly 5% of your brain, but that doesn't mean that it's not there. So just know that whatever comes up for you, there is a deeper reason. And it is, however you want to meet and explore that is up to you.
Yes. And we'll get into pride here in just a second. We'll start with pride. So on that note, the 7 deadly sins, the reason that they can be so triggering and hard for us is that they aren't really about what we do, they're about who we are. We are prideful, we are envious, we are gluttonous. And so it makes us not want to look at it at all. We just say, I'm not prideful. I that's not a thing I can be. And so we close the door. And when we do that, we can't look at our personal shadow. We can't look at our past lives. We can't look at our ancestral shadows. We can't look at the collective shadow because we've just closed the door and said, "Oh, that pride's not a thing for I don't struggle with pride."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Well, but maybe in a past life you really struggled with pride. Or maybe in this current life you really struggle with pride, but in a different way. So if sin is about missing the mark, we can be too prideful, right? Which is how we've been conditioned to believe pride presents, or we can be not prideful enough.
Mm-hmm.
And when we close the door and we just say pride's not a thing I struggle with, then we can't see any of it.
Yeah.
Because we've just locked it all away.
Right, because the brain doesn't handle cognitive dissonance that well. It's very hard to hold two truths. So if you've been told
Mhm.
that being prideful is bad and evil and you're going to burn in hell for all of eternity, then you're just going to be like, well, I can't possibly be that because I'm a good person. And that's the identity that you choose to believe
Right.
based on all of the fear that's been rammed down your throat. And so the problem is when we are missing the mark, we are conditioned, like you just said, to look at only the places where we're too much. And that's coming from the church and any establishment that wants total authority and control over people, not wanting people to be in their power. Because if the church really wanted to help people not miss the mark, they'd have them look at both sides of the coin, saying, okay,
Right.
well, this is an example of being too prideful, but this is an example of not being prideful enough. It's never been about helping people step into their power. It's been about how can we
Right.
enslave them and control them and make them so fucking afraid that they will do anything that we say. And so it's
Mhm.
fascinating to understand this spectrum, because that right there starts to kind of allow us to step back and be like, wow, okay, this does affect me, but just not in the ways that I think. And so most people, especially if you've been working on yourself, if you've gone on any healing journey, if you're in the spiritual space and you're somewhat self-aware, you probably are not leaning into the excess in many of these, if any. Most of the time, people are way on the other side of the spectrum, terrified to look greedy, terrified to look anything that might make them seem or be a bad person, terrified to uncover that they might actually be a bad person. And so it's like when you're also receiving all this programming, it's just pushing you further and further and further down that spectrum, which is really damaging for yourself and also
Mhm.
for the rest of the world. Because if you're highly disempowered, and again, there's two sides of that. You can be highly disempowered and harming other people. You can also be highly disempowered and harming yourself. And that will affect every area of your life.
Mhm. I have examples of that as we go through these.
Yeah, of course you do. So let's dive in.
All right. So we're gonna start with pride. You want to start? You want me to start?
Go for it.
So pride is generally this idea, right, that if you're too prideful, that's a problem. The church considers this to be the cardinal sin, the cardinal vice, like the biggest, baddest of all the seven deadly sins. And their stance is because when you are prideful, then you are not giving God any credit. You have decided that you've done this all yourself and you're not giving God any credit for the things that you do. Now, is being too prideful a problem? Yes. Is not giving anyone or anything around you credit for helping you with your successes a problem? Yes. Is that the problem most of us are struggling with when it comes to pride? No. So with pride, when we decide we can't be prideful, we we can't see our own talent, we can't see our own skill, and we can't see our ability to co-create with our guides because we have shut the door. We said I'm not any good at this. So we take it away. And pride is one that has shown up for me personally a lot. It's interesting how quickly when somebody will compliment me or one of my businesses is a dog trainer, and it took me 9 years to be able to say, I am a better than average dog trainer. It took me years with concrete evidence to be able
Mm-hmm.
to verbalize that,
Mm-hmm.
because somehow this idea of pride was so instilled in me that we need to be humble, that we need to be, I don't know, right? Like this idea of humility, that's what it means to be a good person. Humility is actually about grounded action when we get back into the root of that word. But that's an
Yeah.
interesting little
And
side
it's,
note.
it's interesting too about the grounded piece, because whenever we are ungrounded, like that is when we're likely to make poor choices, be impulsive, abuse power, etc. So like grounding anything is very, very important. But like you just shared, for most people, we really struggle with owning like what it is that we're good at. And I felt the same way the first time that I was like, I am really fucking good at what I do because I've thrown every ounce of my time, energy, and resources into developing my craft. And I do, so much to make sure that my business is ethical, et cetera. It felt really weird to be like, I'm really fucking good at what I do. I was like,
Right?
wow, that felt weird, And so it's so interesting because there's so much that just like compresses all of that. And just like, no, don't
Well,
be that. Don't be too much.
and
Don't
as
be
a
too
side note,
confident.
and I
Like,
don't want to like genderize the conversation too much. I know I just made up my own word, but like, how many men do you know who have trouble being like, yeah, I'm good at that? I mean, come on.
yeah, no, that was going to be my next thing. I was going to say, especially as a woman. And
Yeah.
again, I like I am not somebody that we're gonna do another disclaimer, like lifts women up by like stepping on men. Like
Right. No.
both halves have to heal and raise upwards together because we're meant to work together in balance and in harmony with each other.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think that is it hits deep for everybody. And
Yeah.
especially for women, because there's so much conditioning around like not overshadowing a man or not, stepping into that
Mhm.
energy. And so like how many CEOs that are men are like afraid to look arrogant or pride? They don't fucking care. They're like, I built this fucking empire, but like if a woman says that, oh, people are gonna be
Mhm.
like, how dare she? How dare, and it's like it's
Yeah.
interesting too, because this is also where we're pitted against each other. Like if you have a hard time if you're a woman watching other people, women step into power, success, wealth, like
Yeah.
be
Which we'll get into
be
in
those
envy
things. Yeah,
next.
right. It's
Yeah.
it's really interesting because now we're starting to unpack how we interact with each other based on
Mhm.
all of this programming. So to tie this into the being that represents pride, that's Lucifer. What's interesting is the church or anybody who even just has like Christian or like even like right-wing conditioning, like the Luciferian, like everyone's throwing that word around like it means this terrible thing. All that means is stepping into sovereignty. Because when we look at the difference between divine light beings such as ascended masters, archangels, and divine dark beings such as underworld deities and demons, people like to think good versus evil. That's not at all it. It's like the sun versus
Yeah.
the moon, actually. They're two sides of the same coin that alternate and rotate and help us achieve balance together. So, that being said, the light guides tend to be more towards collectivism and looking at humanity as a whole. The dark guides tend to be more towards individuality, not because one is better than the other, but because you can't have healthy collectivism if you have a fucked relationship with yourself. If you're betraying yourself like a motherfucker, how do you think you're going to participate in society in a healthy way that doesn't make you destroy yourself or be highly resentful of those around you? And so the dark
Mhm.
guides help you liberate yourself and step into sovereignty so that you can have a healthy participation in the greater view. And that being said, are there people that take this too far? Are there people that work with dark guides like Lucifer, et cetera, to just like be all powerful? Yeah, I'm sure there are, but there are far more that work with these beings to step into their power so that they can show up fully empowered in the world and move through the world in a different way. And Lucifer is just a representation of that, of allowing yourself to feel proud of who you are, proud of what you've built, proud of everything. There's nothing wrong with being proud of anything that you've accomplished. There's nothing wrong with being proud of who you are. And like
Mhm.
I urge everyone to kind of try that on for size. Even if you
Yeah.
just stand in front of the mirror, like how would it feel truly to just be like, I am really proud of me. I'm really proud of the
Mhm.
life I've built. Like and lean into that a little bit. And so to help anyone understand like the point of even just bringing up these beings, like obviously they represent archetypes. The demons, Lucifer, like any of the beings that we talk about represent archetypes that we all embody either in our conscious mind or unconscious mind. And so we tend to like the light archetypes as a society, better, the angels, etc. And we tend to like kind of kick away the dark archetypes, but they're both equally as powerful, especially because that's the bulk of your repression is coming from these archetypes that we've like just kicked into the shadows. We don't want to like look at even embodying them. So we can unpack it that way, but then these beings also do exist from a spiritual lens. And so if you are a spiritualist or an occultist, like these beings, these demons can also serve as guides. And they are masters of the shadow. They're masters of these archetypes. And so when you connect with Lucifer spiritually, if you connect with the Goetic Infernal spiritually, they're going to show you all of the ways that this has affected your soul throughout its incarnation process. So Lucifer tends to show up for people when they really struggle with confidence and with self-worth, because
Mhm.
for most people, they are not proud enough. And he's going to help bring you to the seat of your power by helping you heal all the parts of yourself that are afraid to look too prideful.
Yeah. And the reason that we are so mm, one of the reasons I think that pride from an outside the church perspective, why this is the sort of biggest one is because as we're growing up, we start off authentic, right? But we have this need for attachment. And for anybody familiar with like attachment theory, like your ability to have a secure attachment with a caregiver is literally life or death to an infant and to a toddler. I have a toddler. If him and I are not attached, he doesn't survive. That's just how this goes, right? But as we grow up, if we ever feel like a piece of us is threatening our attachment to our caregiver, we will slice that away and we will put it in our shadow because we will always choose attachment over authenticity because it comes down to actually being able to survive. And as we do that, because we start to feel shameful of those pieces. So we feel shameful of something because it appears to threaten our attachment to our caregiver. And so we cut it away. So for me, I think about Eve a lot with this one because she shows up for shame, for people who are really carrying a lot of shame. So in the story of the Garden of Eden, she eats the fruit because let me figure out how I want to say this quick. She knows what her birthright is, and she knows what her authenticity entails. And that is going to put her at odds with her primary attachment figure, which in the story is God. And that is an exceptionally terrifying decision to make, is to say, I'm going to be myself because it's who I deserve to be, even though my primary attachment figure does not agree. Eve is also considered to be, like the first mother. And I think it's really interesting. We could also talk about, the Mother Mary in this, but like, so I'm a parent, and I like, for anybody who's not, pregnancy is hard. Birth is hard. Parenting is freaking hard. Okay. And we should be proud of ourselves for doing however, if anybody here is a parent in any capacity, regardless of how you became a parent, it is hard. And we should be proud of ourselves for showing up at the best we can every day for our kids. The interesting thing, and the reason I think Eve is so powerful for this with the Garden of Eden story, that difficultness in the role of mother becomes the punishment. So right away in the beginning of the Bible, we have men praised for dealing with difficult things. How proud God is of them, how proud they should be of themselves for doing difficult things. And then we have this mother role demoted to a punishment instead of something we should really be proud of. And I will tell you right now, being a mother is absolutely the hardest thing I have ever done in my entire life. There are days, because I work from home and I work for myself and I'm very flexible, I do spend a lot more time in a sort of stay-at-home mom role with my son than my husband does. And there are days I would swap with him in a second because it is so hard. And there are actually studies that show, because of the cortisol levels and you're dealing with somebody that you love, the only more stressful jobs than being a stay-at-home mom are working in an ER or being a active service member in a combat zone. Those are the only two things that are more stressful than being a mother when it comes to your physical body. But we shouldn't be proud of that. You chose to be a mother, you suck it up, you put your head down, and you don't get to be proud of yourself for it, because you also know you're screwing your kid up at the same time. So you're not allowed to be proud of anything. And I think that Eve, as the first mother, and Mother Mary as an important mother figure in the Bible, they can come in and go, yeah, that's bullshit. Like, no.
It's wild how deep even just the feminine wounding goes with that. And so I love that you're bringing that up, because again, like, while this is not going to be fully genderized, like you said, I fucking love that. but in some ways it really, really is, because there are certain things, while pride is like, overall not fully accepted by the church, there's certain things that they will allow you to be prideful of, and certain things that you are inherently programmed to feel shame or worthlessness around. And that's so damaging, because from a parent lens, a parent perspective, like, how well are you going to show up for your kid if you're full of shame and guilt and worthlessness? You're not. And then it's not always what you do, it's how you do it, how you move through the world, it's what you model. So if you're modeling those things for your child, it's going to impact them, even if you're not telling them to be those things or feel those things.
Yeah, just a quick note for parents who are like, having their daily freak out. The research also tells us that when we screw up and we do something, we handle something with our child we don't like how we handled it. The recovery, the how we handle it after that, is actually more important than the break itself. So while we may, hurt our child by losing our temper with them or something like that, how we come back and fix that with them is actually more important. Are we able to apologize, or are we so prideful that we can't? Or are we so full of shame that we can't?
Yeah.
But being able to actually come back and recover from that situation is is actually the important piece. So just for any parents who are like having their daily moment of, oh my God, I'm screwing up my kids.
Yeah. Well, the repair
Side
rupture
note.
spectrum is
Yeah.
really important for any dynamic. Because if you
Mhm.
think about any relationship you have, whether it's family, friend, romantic relationship, the rupture, like ruptures are going to happen. And depending on how volatile you are, i.e. where your moon sign is, like it's going to really highly depend on how those ruptures happen. They will happen, but it's
Mhm.
how you repair after that really matters. And so again, if you're too prideful, then that is going to impact your ability to like fix the cracks in any of these dynamics. But on the other side of the spectrum, if you're not prideful enough and you don't know your power, that will also
Mhm.
impact how you navigate any of these relational dynamics.
Yeah. Yeah. Pride is one I think we could definitely just like talk about for
Yeah,
the
we could have done a
entire
whole episode.
just on pride. But
Moving
it
forward.
is an interesting, it is definitely an interesting place to start, because I do think that
Mm.
the sin of pride is where we do start as children to create our own shadow. I think that's where
Yeah.
we do
Oh,
start to
yeah.
shove wounding and authentic pieces right into our shadow and say, oh, I can't do that because it's not safe.
Yeah.
And that starts very, very young.
Yeah. I completely
So,
agree.
yeah.
All right. So next we will dive into envy. Do you want to kick us off with your thoughts on envy?
Sure. Envy, I think envy might be my favorite one. Like, I'm just looking at the list and like, I think envy might be my favorite one. And I say that because I'm just looking at my notes real quick. I say that because, again, the seven deadly sins are full of shame, and shame makes us not want to look at something. So most of us can't even identify envy in the first place because there is so much shame around feeling envious. So most of us can't even identify when we feel envy towards another person. And then beyond that, because we can't even get to the envy spot, we can't get to the understanding that envy is just pointing us towards things we want. That's all. So if I'm feeling envious towards you for like your ability to talk about demons on the internet, I can either be triggered by it and be like, oh, Kristen, she's awful. She should not be talking about stuff like that. Or I can identify it and say, I'm really envious that she is so embodied and grounded that she can talk about demons on the internet. And then I can go, man, I want to talk about demons on the internet. But if I just stop at Kristen's the worst, then I can't get there. Like, I can't get there if I can't even identify the envy in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And so then beyond that, it goes into, now that I've finally identified what I want that's sitting in my shadow is to talk about demons on the internet, it goes into, do I feel safe enough to grab for the things that I want?
Yeah.
And is it okay for two of us to talk about demons on the internet? Or is there so much scarcity that there are only so many people who want to learn about demons? And so if you're teaching about it, I can't. So it's so, I think this is why like it's really my favorite one, because
It's
it's so
interesting because it
windy.
doesn't like envy doesn't hit as hard as like wrath or like, some of
Right.
these ones that are just like fucking like in your face. And so it's easier to think like, oh, well, that doesn't really hit that deep. Like that's not that destructive, but it is for the reasons that you just stated. And so I was laughing when you were bringing this up because I can't tell you how many clients, and again, especially women, I do work with both men and women, but like women especially I think get weird around like envy and jealousy because we're
Mm-hmm.
conditioned to believe that that's just like so wrong, that you're such a terrible person if you're
And
going to
it's
feel
it's
jealous
just a
of.
thing women do.
Yeah.
Bad women are
Right. Yeah.
envious.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like we're told that we're not those things, but then if you are, you're like a terrible person or you're. And so it's like it's just so fucked up. But anyway, it's so funny because I can't tell you how many women are like, I'm not a jealous person. And I'm like, whoa,
Yeah.
where did that come from? And so we start to like unpack that. And what we always find is they're like, so fucking jealous that I can't handle any of it. So I just pretend I'm not, but then I don't look at it so that I can't fix it. And I can't even acknowledge the things that I really desire, which is why
Mm-hmm.
I am so jealous. And so this is the jealousy. I actually fucking love jealousy and envy because it gives you the
Yeah.
keys to the kingdom. It gives you the
Yeah.
keys to the things that you desire. But if you, like you just said, can't look at the fact that you feel those things sometimes, you can't actually look beyond them at the things you deeply desire. And this is
Yeah.
one of the reasons why I love working with demons or the goetic infernals, however you want to refer to them, because they make us lean into our desires. They make us self-advocate. They make us claim what it is that we want and take up space and do it fucking boldly and proudly. And so what's really interesting is when we don't want to look at the jealousy piece, like the first thing I unpack is like, okay, so what? So what if you're jealous? Like, what does
Right.
that mean? Like, and people are like, they're kind of like stunned for a minute because they're just kind of like,
Mhm.
well, I don't know. I thought that
Well,
was
and
like
that's
trash,
the
you know?
magic, is being able to be like, I feel envy, and that doesn't mean anything about me.
Yeah, right, right.
That doesn't have anything to do with who I am as a person, just because I'm feeling envy. But the 7 deadly sins tell us otherwise. They
Mhm.
tell us that you are envious, and that makes you a bad person.
Yeah. And when it's interesting too, because we also forget that everyone, we all filter the entire world through our concept of self and we filter other
Mhm.
people through our perception of self. So when someone has a healthy relationship with jealousy, they're not going to come at you if you admit that.
Right.
And so some of my clients are like, trying to like swallow the word and they're like, I'm fucking jealous. And like, they're waiting for me to be like, well, fuck you. And I'm just like, great, that's amazing. And they're just like, what? I'm like, no, it's so good because you're like, you see something behind that person or that thing that you really desire. And that's so important. And I think everyone, when we can look at this within ourselves, it's so powerful. Because I remember the first time that I felt jealous on the spiritual journey. And I was like, ugh. And then I was like, ooh, whoa, what the fuck is that? And so I started to unpack that a little bit.
Mhm.
And I realized that there was an account who was just like so embodied, talking about like all the spooky shit. And I didn't even have the
Yeah.
balls to put the word witch in my Instagram bio. And I was like, well, there we go. I am letting myself admit that I want to be that, but I'm so scared to take the first step. And so it was so much easier. It would have been so much easier to just like demonize that person, be like, oh, well, they're like annoying, then be like, no, I actually want to be that, but I'm so fucking scared. And so when
Yep.
we're able to confront that, then coming back to the safety piece, we can figure out what we need to do to feel safe. And so for me personally, I didn't have the audacity to put the word witch in my Instagram bio because my fucking shadow was full of all of the lives where I got brutally
Mhm.
tortured and murdered for working with demons and being a witch. And so I had to unpack all that. And
Yep.
it was an arduous
Well,
journey. It wasn't just like a one and done.
and
But
how many of those past lives had to do with sisterhood wounds and
mm,
being betrayed by other people
yeah. Oh yeah.
for your magic? And so this is where we get into sisterhood wounds and the witch trials. And if we're too busy tearing each other down, then we can't tear down the patriarchy.
Yeah.
This one really helps to control women by forcing us to control ourselves.
1000%. And what's so interesting is like part of my work is diving really deep into the witch wound, as you know. And so
Mhm.
when we dive into this, the surface layer aspects of the witch wound is very like the church doesn't like me because I'm a witch. Or like
Right.
I got caught summoning demons in the woods. Like, like very surface level stuff. But then when we start to take it deeper and deeper and deeper, because obviously everything is nuanced as fuck and there's so many layers, everyone hits a point where they see that they were killed because they were betrayed by their own coven members, where something happened where they were
Or
like
they did
too.
the betraying.
Yeah,
Yep.
or that too. Yeah, right. And so it's like and the witch ways were really witch trials were a very powerful way for women to take out other people that they were competing against,
Mhm.
whether you wanted their land, whether you wanted their man, like, and there's so many facets of this, but what was so interesting is oftentimes those betrayals hit the deepest because we assume that someone who holds a different perspective, i.e. the church, is going to hate us. But when your own sister in your own
Mhm.
coven doesn't like you because you're too powerful, too beautiful, too dark, maybe you were the only one working with demons or whatever the fuck,
Mhm.
that hits so much deeper because it's like, wow, one of my own could do that to me
Yeah.
because of jealousy, because of envy. And that's part of why that feels so unsafe. Because in the past, somebody being jealous of us or triggered by us would potentially mean our death. And that's
Yeah.
why these things carry such a powerful charge now. And so this is where the past life perspective is really important because what we feel is valid. We don't want to gaslight ourselves or invalidate ourselves, but we also have to understand that sometimes what we're feeling is not from this life, is not from this moment. And so like
Yeah.
a coworker being jealous of your promotion doesn't mean that you're going to get burned at the stake. And sometimes our soul just needs
Yep.
to realize that. And I know that sounds silly, but I'm being dead
No.
serious because like the first time I started to step out onto social media, I started to get some comments that were triggering. My nervous system reacted like I was getting electrocuted.
Mhm.
And then I like took a step back and I was like, my house isn't burning down. I'm not getting dragged out and hung. Oh my God, I'm going to live, And so then we can start to move through like some of these wounds and like really be at our edge, nervous
Mhm.
system wise, within our window of tolerance, but at that edge, being uncomfortable, but understanding that nothing was going to bring imminent death.
Yeah. And our nervous systems just haven't caught up yet because
Mhm,
we still tear down other women. You can watch, like, it happens in Hollywood all the time,
mhm,
freaking all the time.
mhm.
Women are torn down for stupid. Just watch the comments section and you
Yeah.
see people tearing down women for the stupidest things and not the man who's also a part of the situation.
Right.
Um, but our nervous systems haven't caught up to the fact that that is not the same as being burned at the stake or being exiled from your community or
Right.
what. Like, if you're exiled from your community nowadays, you're still probably going to be fine.
Just
Like,
like
let's be
move,
real.
yeah, go to a different town, start a new life.
Like,
But like then you would die because there'd be no way for
exactly.
you to get the resources and the food and the warmth and the shelter.
Exactly.
Yeah, 1000%. And so to kind of circle this back to working with
Hmm.
demons, because like
Of
obviously that's
course.
my
Right.
most favorite thing
And
in the
then I'm going
entire
to bring it
world.
back to Eve. Right. So talk about the demons. Bring them, bring it on.
So it's so interesting because when we work with demons, what they do is they will just take you right to the source. So for example, in this situation, Leviathan is the demon that represents envy.
Hmm.
So he's going to take you to all of the areas in your life that where you feel that unconscious, and sometimes it is unconscious. There are times where
Hmm.
clients are like, I swear
Yeah.
on my life, I'm not jealous. We go into the shadow and they're like, oh my fucking God. And so the demon's going to unearth all the things that you refuse to feel and look at
Yeah.
and then show you what's behind it so that you can liberate yourself. Because I can tell you right now, when you can move through the fear of like, oh, God forbid, you're a little bit jealous sometimes, then you actually can start to give yourself permission to claim what it is that you want. And that's really all the
Hmm.
infernals want for you, is to just feel
Yeah.
free, feel happy, feel embodied. Like you're
Yeah.
a safe person when you're embodied, when you feel free, when you're like resentful and imprisoned, like you're probably a highly volatile, reactive, wounded person. So you choose what you
Yes.
want to be.
Yes. And so traditionally, right, so in the Garden of Eden, the idea is that, like, Eve was envious of God and so she had to eat the fruit. But like, I want to bring it beyond that and I want to point out the dynamic in the spiritual community between Lilith and Eve. So,
Mm.
which I have not found to be true working with Lilith and Eve. I actually find them to be opposite sides of the same coin. With a very similar sense of humor. No. Um but there's all this stuff on social media, right? Like, don't be Eve, be Lilith, or like, why be Eve when you can be Lilith? And like, why not be both? Like, Eve was super embodied and empowered when she decided to eat the fruit because she knew what she was worth. And, maybe she even was envious of Lilith and Lilith's freedom, and she was able to, I don't know, identify the envy as something that pointed her towards what she wanted. And so it helped her to make that decision. And so I have found working with Eve and Lilith to be this really powerful dynamic to help unearth, mm, where shame is really covering up, again, these sisterhood wounds. And how just because Lilith has something Eve wants doesn't mean Eve can't have it also. And the same is true for us. Just because you have something I want doesn't mean I can't also have it. Which actually breeds us right into greed, which has a lot to do with scarcity and abundance wounds.
Mhm. Yeah.
So,
And I love that too, because it's like just because Lilith was embodying certain things doesn't mean that Eve could not. And this
right.
is this is the conditioning that we constantly get
Hmm.
shown. These are the things that we
Yeah.
constantly lean into, primarily with the example you made at the beginning of this segment was just around how, like, if I'm talking about demons on the internet, like, depending on scarcity or abundance, you
Yeah.
either feel like, great, there's an avenue to do this, or, well, fuck, I can't do that 'cause someone else is already doing it. And so it
Right.
it does bring us back to like this competition, like there's only so many pieces of the pie type of
Right.
mentality, and that couldn't be further from the truth. So that being said,
Right.
let's segue into greed.
Greed. I think greed is also an interesting one because
Mhm.
surface level, it's about money, right? And about
Mhm.
wanting things, and it's about wanting excess, right? Like, you're greedy because you want this thing for yourself, which somehow instantly implies that there's not enough for somebody else. And so what greed starts to do is it really I think in modern day, at least, it pits us against each other in another way, because there's not enough money for us all to have money. There's not enough. And of course there are like areas of the world in which like scarcity is a real thing. But in a lot of our lives, it's really more of a perceived thing. And it's a
Mm-hmm.
really effective way for the church to control people.
Mm-hmm.
Because if the church says, don't be greedy, give your money to the church, then it I mean, like, this is really obvious. Like, I feel like this one is really, really obvious. You know?
Like, what a great way to manipulate people out of their money and out of their power, just telling them that they're wrong if they don't fork up their money. Like, it's just funny when you put it like
I
that.
know, like, it feels really obvious to me. So we think about greed as being like too greedy and hoarding wealth and hoarding resources. And yes, like, that's a thing. Nobody should do that. But I don't think anybody we're talking to today is like hoarding wealth or hoarding resources. But when we fall on the other side of the spectrum of greed, we don't get our needs met. Like, we can't clarify what we need or allow ourselves to meet that need because it would be greedy. Is it greedy of me to charge what I need in order to live comfortably? Is it greedy of me to be like, I need to take a nap because my son had me up all night, instead of like what I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, are these things
Yeah.
greedy, or are they just me taking care of my needs?
Yeah, and it's interesting too because I think that there's so many layers to this because at first, usually we hit on the like I don't want to look or appear greedy at all, so I'm not going to take even remotely enough of what I need. So as like a business owner, this looks like massively undercharging, doing a lot of stuff for free. Good luck staying in business. Good luck
Right.
being able to pay for your life and good luck having the impact that you desire. Because I always say if you're here for like a major legacy, you want to leave a big mark on the world, you can't do that fucking dead broke and homeless. You can't
Right.
donate money to things that you're passionate about with if you don't fucking have any, and you cannot help people and heal people with a dysregulated nervous system because your fucking power is going to get shut off in your house and your car is going to get repossessed. You can't live like that. But on the other side of the spectrum, there is nothing wrong with wanting to have more than enough because like your needs
Right.
are arbitrary. Needs are different person to person. So it's like, you know, what you need to baseline cover like survival needs is not the same thing you may need to thrive or have an abundant, fulfilling life. And this is where
Right.
just because you can cover all your shit doesn't mean that you don't have greed wounds, because what do you, bringing this back to desire, what do you want? Do you
Right.
want a vacation home so that you can have incredible memories with your family? Do you want to, have certain nice things, whatever? There's nothing wrong with that. So we lean
Right.
into like the material side of things. The demons are like, fucking do it. Manifest
Yeah.
the car, have the thing. Because like also the human experience, as traumatizing and heavy and karmic as it can be, is also supposed to be some fucking fun sometimes. And so if
Yeah.
you want to buy the shoes, have the car, do it, fucking do it. And the demons will always tell you to do it, because part of this is giving yourself permission to want what you want and to have what you want and to
Hmm.
show up proudly with it. You're not an asshole if you want a vacation house
Right.
or money or even just for wanting to have more than enough. There's
Well, and if
nothing wrong
it
with that.
isn't having more than enough the best way to help other people?
Mhm.
Like,
I believe we really can't help people unless it's coming from overflow. Like you can't
right.
truly help people in a healthy, safe, sustainable way if it's not coming from overflow. Because if it's not
Right.
coming from overflow, you're tapping into your like personal capacity. You're on borrowed time, borrowed
Yeah.
energy, and then it starts to become vampiric. And I know today
Yeah.
we're not even touching vampires because
Whole
that could
other
be like
thing. Yeah.
3 whole episodes in itself. But like when you are giving more than you're getting, you are
Hmm.
essentially being fed on, whether that's by the matrix, by the church, by the world, by
Yeah.
the people in your life. And so if you're afraid to face these greed wounds, you're potentially giving all of your money and power and life force energy away to be a good person. And in essence, you're destroying yourself trying to do that.
Yeah.
And
If
so
you
it's
think about like a
interesting too,
body of,
because
go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
It's like a body of, if you think about like a body of water, you need to have the right amount of money coming, the right amount of water coming in, the right amount of water being held,
Mhm.
and the right amount of water going out. If you
Yes.
don't have anything coming out, you flood. If you don't have anything coming in, you dry out. And if all you do is hold stuff, like think about like a stagnant pond with
Yeah.
no movement.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
you've got to have this equal flow in and out in order to have a healthy body of water. It doesn't even really matter what kind of body of water you're talking about.
Mhm.
There
It's
has to be
interesting
a flow.
because that wasn't what I initially was going to say, and I'll circle back to that in a second. But when we start to unpack money wounds in kind of conjunction with the greed wounds,
Hmm.
like, people think, okay, well, like I can pay my bills, so like I must not have any money wounds. And it's like, no, because
Yeah.
there's so many different facets of this. Like, can you receive? Can you
Mhm.
hold? Do you have the capacity to hold? And I don't mean get grippy and hoard. I mean, hold. Like, can you put money
Right.
into different accounts? Can you save it? Can you do whatever? Like what? And then can you release it? And then we can take this like 10 levels deeper. There's past life financial wounding and all this
Yes.
stuff. I went really deep into that because my Saturn was in my second house. So my Saturn return just took me through the bowels of my financial trauma. And I was like, fuck. So I did
Yeah.
everything under the sun to make sure that I fully understood why the things that were happening were happening. And it made a lot more sense being able to do that. But what I was going to say is part of the greed wound is what is modeled for us everywhere in the
Hmm.
world. So we see terrible money hungry corporations destroying
Yep.
humanity for the sake of profit. And then we take a very black and white approach and say, wow, they're doing that. So like businesses in power and people in power are despicable and money is evil. And we make all these grand assumptions that then pull us further out of our power because highly disempowered people are not going to change the world. Highly
Yeah.
disempowered people are not going to leave their mark and leave their legacy and promote healing and everything we truly desire. And also, not having money doesn't help you create any fucking change because then you can't even live. And so the
Yeah.
problem is we're constantly being shown the one spectrum of these greed wounds and not
Hmm.
the other side of what could potentially happen if we heal them.
Yeah.
Because there's
You
like
know, this
ethical
is,
money and things are like it's an amplifier. Money and power are
I was just
amplifiers.
going to say that. Yep.
So like
Exactly.
when if you're not healing these things, if you're not healing your power wounds, etc., when you
Mhm.
step into wealth and success and money and power, the cracks start to show for some people
Yep.
who are unethical, who were able to kind of keep that under wraps when they were smaller and less successful. But at the same token, when you have heart-centered people heal their greed wounds and feel worthy of
Yep.
claiming the fact that they want more than enough stuff, then when we start to step into power, the overflow really hits for themselves and for
Mhm.
other people because money and power amplify the good intentions of their heart and their soul and their path. And this is where, like, again, when we're constantly being fed this single narrative about money being evil and power being evil and corporations being evil, that's propaganda. It's just
Yep.
continuing to push people further away from the very things that they need to fix
Hmm.
this shit show that we call Earth.
So I wasn't planning this. This just popped in my head, which is interesting. But so there's passages in the Bible. I'm like a Bible expert. Most of my study actually has to do with texts that are not in the Bible. But there are, we are all familiar with Jesus talking about how like, poor people will like inherit the kingdom of God and all the things. And I think that it is interesting, first of all, that of course the church has historically had the hypocrisy of you should be poor to get to heaven, so give us your money. Um, but also this idea of Jesus as like this idea of Jesus being nomadic and poor, when in reality, he was nomadic and he was sitting at tables with poor people and lepers and all the things. But he was funded by a handful of wealthy women, including Mary Magdalene. And so he's a good, if we want to just start with beings, like he's a good example of what it means to have a healthy, like, influx of money as well as an output. Jesus wasn't serving his community from a place of, I can't think of the word I'm looking for, when you don't have enough.
Poverty.
Yeah, like he wasn't serving from that place. He was serving from overflow. He had other people in his community taking care of him, and so he could take care of others. And that's not something we all have access to now, this idea of community to take care of you so you can take care of others. And that's a whole thing.
Well, I
Um,
think that puts it though in the
but
proper order because you're receiving so
right.
you can give, and we're conditioned to do the opposite, give so that you can receive, and all that does is
Yes.
create a debt, sometimes physically,
Yeah.
sometimes energetically, because if you're giving and
Yeah.
giving and giving and giving and holding your hands out like a pauper waiting to get your shot, that's fucked. You know what I mean? Because you
Yeah.
really can't continue down that road, and we're conditioned to do that first and then hopefully receive, whereas he was doing it the opposite. The money
Right.
was flowing to him, the resources, whatever, so that he
Yeah.
could then flow it out.
And
That's
it's
how
not
it should
talked
be.
about a lot.
No.
It's really not
Mm-mm.
talked about a lot. Like yes, he stayed in other people's homes. Like he wasn't um like spending other people's money willy-nilly.
Right.
He wasn't just like, "Oh, I've got
Right.
all this money and so I'm going to be super like over the top with everything."
Right.
But he didn't have to worry about his needs being met. And so he was able to meet the needs of others. And I don't think that that aspect is talked about enough. And I do think that, like you've mentioned, all the light beings are very much about the collective, but they're not about the collective at the expense of yourself. So
Correct.
there's a lot of, so yeah, so there's a lot of, right, that within the light beings and Christianity and all the Christian beings, it's this idea of self-sacrifice. They're not really about self-sacrifice. They're about taking care of yourself so you can take care of the collective, and really shining lights on those places. So my own journey, and you know about this, right? So I started with all these like sort of Christian beings as I stepped out of the church. I went all the way over to the other side with all the demons. And then the light beings like Eve and Asherah, they were like, "Hey, come back. Like, we need to talk to you again." And I'm like, "Yeah, no. Hell no. Like, I found radical acceptance with the demons. I am not going back." And they're like, "It's not about that." They're like, we are not about self-sacrifice.
Yeah.
And
That's just how they're like handed to people, or that's how
exactly.
we're told to embody that wounded archetype. I call it wounded light, or like the bleeding heart, like
Yes.
wounded healer archetype, where
Mhm.
we're conditioned to destroy ourselves to help, because somehow
Yes.
we've been conditioned to believe that our journey isn't noble enough and our purpose isn't powerful enough if we're not
Mhm.
bleeding all over the place and destroying ourselves in pursuit of it.
Yes.
And I call bullshit on that. How the fuck
Yes.
are you going to have the longevity and the sustainability of helping people? And like, again, like if you're here with a massive purpose to leave a legacy, how the fuck are you going to do that if you're like bleeding out on the side of the road because you're like giving all your shit away? Like, that's not, no. And so this is again
Yeah.
where like the religion occult intersection happens, where we like want to step into spirituality and power, but we bring forth that like self-sacrifice, self-betrayal energy from
Mhm.
religion, and then we try to step into our purpose with that energy, and then we wonder why it doesn't work. We wonder
Right.
why we attract people that are vampiric or take advantage of
Right.
us, etc. Like the light, the divine light, and the beings that embody those archetypes have never been about us destroying ourselves for other people. That doesn't
Right.
that's not love, actually. That's so fucking
Mhm.
codependent and toxic and enmeshy. It's not even a word, but it is now. Like that's never been what it's about from a divine lens. And this is where again we have to step
Mhm.
back from all the bullshit we've been sold.
Yeah. Eve's like, "Eat the apple.
Yeah.
Be embodied. Be empowered. Eat it." She's not like, "Starve yourself and give the apple to someone else." I don't
Yeah, no, definitely not. Definitely not. All right. Shall we move on to lust?
Did you talk about whatever demon talks about greed?
Oh, sorry. Oh my God. I almost
That's
forgot about
I know
Mammon.
you forgot
Yeah.
your
I
demon.
forgot Mammon. Oh my God. Mammon, I'm so fucking sorry. Okay. So real quick, I do want to touch on Mammon and just like the wealth demons in general, because while Mammon represents greed and he is like the key to unlocking the depths of that archetype within you and that wound within you. So if you have a greed wound, you've probably had past lives where you weaponize money, where you were greedy as fuck.
Mhm.
And that potentially is a block on you having success now, because your soul's like, we destroyed some people last time. So like, we don't want to do that again, but then on the flip side, there's probably been lives where greed was weaponized against you, and then that can manifest in a variety of ways. And so when we work with Mammon or any kind of wealth demon, they're going to take you through those wounds so that those imprints, that density is not being stored in your field, so that you can reframe your relationship with money, with wealth, with abundance, with whatever it is that you desire, so that you can live an aligned life. And for some people, again, aligned is going to be like Miami penthouse, and for other people aligned is going to be like a house in the woods, and for other people it's going to be living nomadically. Like, it doesn't matter as long as you're doing what you want. Like, it does not matter. And so what's interesting about the wealth demons though is like they all operate in a very different way. Some of them operate more passively. Some of them operate by like, helping you manifest and hold on to large sums of money. Some of them help you navigate money in a much more sustainable way. And so what's really interesting is whenever I take people to connect with a demon to help heal greed wounds or to help heal
Sorry.
money wounds, what's really interesting is they will all like sometimes different demons will step forward for different reasons. So when I first started working with my first wealth demon, who is Belial, who is like one of my favorite demons of all time. I love them all dearly, but he is just like so special. What's interesting is he had approached it from a very different lens. So the first thing he had me do was heal any self-betrayal bullshit, because he's like, you're capping your capacity. Money responds to your life force energy. So if you're destroying yourself, your glass ceiling's low as fuck in terms of being able to hold and do anything with money. And so everything with him was very like sustainable, very like your nervous system needs like monthly recurring revenue, et cetera. Whereas there are demons that may actually help you be able to have the capacity to receive like a large lump sum of money if you need some like kind of big manifestation. So I want to just make note of that, because for anybody listening who's curious about working with demons, especially wealth demons, like we need to heal the money wounds first. Because the biggest mistake people make with Mammon or any other money demon is if you're trying to like use a demon as a quick route to like money, good fucking luck. There's a reason why you don't have money right now. There's a reason your current reality is serving you, because your shadow is driving the bus. So money probably doesn't feel safe, receiving might not feel safe. And so if you have like severe money or success wounding in your shadow, like i.e. if you've died at the height of your success in a lot of lives, money feels detrimental. It feels so dangerous. It feels like it's going to put a target on you. And so if you use demons to bring you fast money and then your shadow can't hold on to that, you're going to destroy yourself in the process. And this is where people think that demons are volatile, or that they like take what they bring you, or that they destroy your life. No. Your shadow destroys your life. And so if you try to cut corners, you're going to have to face that later on. So demons primarily operate, or my style of working with demons operates by allowing them to take you through your shadow to heal the greed wounds, heal the money wounds, heal anything that's blocking you from having what you wanted. Because if there were no blocks, if there were no unconscious fears, you would have it already. If you did not have a block, you would be fucking wealthy. You know what I mean? Like if you want, let's say anyone listening wants like, X amount of money and they want this life. If you don't have that, there's a reason why, and there could be a million reasons why.
That's shadow work. It's like,
yeah, exactly. Right.
You have to understand what's underneath it all in order to actually heal it. Like my favorite example is just like a really typical example with my husband. Like I can be a reactive person. So he triggers me. I become reactive. I blame him. Okay, if I don't understand through shadow work, this is actually stemming from an issue with my childhood and my father, I can't heal the relationship I have with my husband because I'm not trying to heal the same thing. Like, if this hand is bleeding, I can't do surgery on my foot to heal my hand. Like, I can do the foot surgery, but my hand is still going to bleed. Like, I don't.
Right. Yeah. right. Exactly. And it's interesting because I feel like this is. Right. And I bring this up with the money and the greed piece because there's this like dichotomy with demons where like most people think that they're evil and scary and possess people, which untrue. Again, not going to touch that today. But the other side of it is like demons sometimes can have this there's this belief around them that they're like a fast route to like money, fame, power, sex, like whatever the fuck you want. And it's like, you don't understand what you're trying to do. And so if you're working with them appropriately, they will lead you into your shadow to heal the blocks that you have to what it is that you want. And then they facilitate the manifestation of these things by helping you become the person that you need to be to have the things. Because like, let's be real. If someone's dead broke, you don't know how to manage money, obviously, either because you blow it or because you've never touched it. You don't know how, you don't have the skills, you don't have the tools. And so you have to build those and cultivate those. And like nothing is like cutting corners. Demons are not cutting corners. If you think that that's what they're for, don't touch them because they will bitch slap you with some experiences that prove otherwise. So I just wanted to make note of that. But Mammon is a demon that will help unlock greed wounds and help move through money stuff, but there also are a whole other slew of wealth demons. So again, if you do choose to dive into your shadow with the infernals to heal some money stuff, you could potentially meet a whole other realm of financial / wealth demons that are separate from Mammon because they all have their very specific ways that they operate.
Yeah. I have found it super powerful to be working with, like for me, and everybody's path is different, the demons and the more divine light beings. It's this interesting like it almost allows for there to be this spotlight really shown on something. You can't experience the light without the dark. If we're just looking at, like I'm looking out my window right now, right? And I can see shadows and I can see light and I live in a forest. If it just goes dark, I can't identify the shadows and I can't identify anything. If it just goes too light, I also can't identify anything.
Yeah. Well, right. It's like shining a flashlight on a beach in pure sunlight. Like
I have to have the light and the dark in order to be able to see what's real and what's not. and in order to see what needs to be fixed and what doesn't.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to go out there if I hear a weird sound and I'm going to start trying to fix like my, gas tank instead of like the chicken coop because I can't see anything or identify anything. You have to have both.
Right.
And not everybody, like some people are very like going to do just
Dark
demons,
heavy,
and some people
right.
are really heavy on the angels or whatever it is, but there is an interesting relationship between the two. And I think that a lot of the light, this is sort of a sidetrack, but a lot of the light beings are painted as like all loving and all compassionate and all whatever, and they are, but I would say also so are the demons. Like I haven't found my demons to be any less loving than my light guides.
I've actually found some of the light guides to be
But-
snarkier than some of the demons.
But that's what I was going to say, is that the light guides will also hold you to the fire.
Yeah.
And go, hey, no,
It's
that
so
is
funny.
not how we're going to do this.
And this is where, and we're not going to touch this today either, but like your ability to really receive true messages and be discerning versus just like superimposing what you want to hear on top of your guides. Cause it's like, there are so many people that I think just like want their guides to tell them that everything's fine and that's it. And then you're just going to kind of like superimpose that or block the truth. And so if you're really open to receive what your guides truly have to say, you could potentially be bitch slapped with some wisdom by an angel, because they're like, listen, you're not fucking doing what you're supposed to be doing. They're not going to just like coddle you and hold your hair and tell you everything's fine if you're destroying your life. Demons may be a little more brutal about it, but all of the guides are going to hold you to the fire when you absolutely need it.
Okay. A little side note. I know. Anyway.
Editing Kate is back for just a minute because this conversation is very long, and as I've already mentioned, everything in it can be taken a lot deeper and talked about with even more nuance. But due to the length of the conversation, a handful of things on my list got skipped. But there is one thing that is important enough for me to actually edit it into this video as we start to talk about sloth, and that is this. I believe very strongly that as human beings, we are meant to be powerful enough to do all the things Kristen and I were talking about in the greed section. Healing our abundance wounds, healing our greed wounds and our money wounds so that we can attract and hold all the money that we're looking for and co-create the lives of our dreams. However, I also know that there are systems in place within society that make that impossible for a lot of our marginalized communities. It is impossible to heal those wounds and do those things and step into your full power if you are too busy working around the clock to keep your family fed and your lights on. And this, we all know that this is a purposeful piece of society to keep people where they are. Now, sloth is one of the ways that society has created and upheld a lot of these systems by telling us if only you work harder, you can make more money and you can change your situation. We all know that that's not true. But that is how the 7 deadly sins work. They're sneaky, they're insidious, and they have worked their way into every aspect of society. And sloth is the one that helps to uphold systems that tell our marginalized communities, if only you work harder, you'll make enough money to change your situation. And convince everybody else to help uphold that system, which is probably the even more important piece of it, is this is the one that has convinced the rest of society to allow these systems to remain in place, because if only they worked harder, they would be able to work themselves right into a different situation. And along those same lines, sloth is the one that has convinced society that if those people would just work harder, they could change their situation. And the reason that they're in that situation is because they don't. It's because they're lazy. And we all know that that's not true, but this is how sloth helps to uphold that belief system, and through that, the oppressive systems. So sloth has helped us to create and maintain systems, a lot of systems of oppression. And it's really important to mention that here, after we finish that section about greed and as we move into the conversation on sloth.
Anyway,
I love it.
Let's do sloth next, if that works for you, because it
Sure.
goes really well with greed. So we were just talking about how you have to have like this good balance and all the things, right? But sloth is also really about boundaries and about the need for rest and accepting rest as essential. for us in order to be able to heal. So we tend to think about sloth as laziness. And I think we can also think about sloth as ignorance. And there's definitely an interesting conversation to be had there about the shadow and purposefully refusing to look at it. But it's also tied up in this idea that in our society, our self-worth equates to what we do. How much I do what I do has my self-worth is completely wrapped up in what I do and how much stuff I get done. Whereas sloth comes in and says, yes, also, you need to rest, and also stop self-betraying, and also boundaries, and the ability to say, no, I'm not going to put my energy towards that right now. So we think about it as being lazy. Are we lazy, or do we just like need to rest? Like, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, because I feel like, again, there's a spectrum. Like, we can be high achievers in some places and like sometimes a little bit lazy in other places. And this is where we have to be honest with ourselves, because like the
Yeah.
brain, again, doesn't like cognitive dissonance. So if you only want to look at the parts of yourself that like work really hard and not the parts of yourself where like maybe you get a little lazy and like drop the ball and like have poor boundaries in the sense of like putting things on other people, like, you know, we have to look at this like holistically. But in this capitalistic hustle culture, the harder you work and the harder you push and the more you destroy yourself in the process, you get a gold star. You know,
Yes.
it's really interesting because especially like coming into the entrepreneurial space when I did where I did was like in this hyper masculine business container that was all like, you know, basically like do whatever the fuck you need to do every single day to make as much fucking money as possible. And it's like, whoa, that's a quick route to burnout. And so what was interesting is like when I started to see people be like, oh, I don't work these days, or I don't do this thing or whatever, I was like, what the fuck? What do you mean?
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Because there's so much conditioning around like destroy yourself to be successful at all costs. And so when we start to toe the line and like pull that back a little bit, and we stop doing the things that we used to, you know, we stop stacking our schedule and destroying ourselves, and we start to implement boundaries and say, no, it can feel really weird and it can feel lazy and it can feel weak. And we have to confront this wound to not lean back over into the other side. Because as someone personally, I talk about this a lot, I've struggled deeply with burnout my whole life. So I was the person who like only wanted to like hustle and push and go and go and go. If you don't set a limit, your body or your guides or the universe and all of the above will set one for you. And you'll just like hit these brick walls over and over. So it was interesting is like when I started to have to like restructure my schedule and my day and all this stuff, it felt lazy. It felt unproductive. You know what I mean? And so it was wild then to have to kind of swim in this energy of like, I know I need to do this for me, but like, what does this mean about me and my worth and my ability to achieve and accomplish, you know? And it was interesting though, because I was more productive taking that time and having the boundaries and just letting my whole schedule be an utter fucking shit show. It's so interesting, the conditioning that comes with this one, because it's still so prevalent.
Well, and it's not natural to be in a constant state of doing and growth is completely unnatural. I mean, you just look at the earth.
Right.
The earth is not constantly growing. There are periods of rest and there are periods of decay and there are periods of growth. Like, this is not something we do constantly. This is something that comes in cycles. The moon comes in cycles. I mean, it's just simply, it's completely
everything
unnatural.
is cyclical. So what's interesting though is that the demon that represents sloth is Belphegor. And what's so fascinating is technically Belphegor is a money demon, but a passive money demon, meaning the money is going to flow to you in very passive ways. So this could look like setting up streams of passive income. This could look at money just kind of like being sent to you, etc. And like, I am someone who like, if you're trying to manifest money, you do not want to like rely on your ability to pay your bills off of miracle money. Like, money's not going to get mailed to you all the time. That's not like a sustainable nervous system regulated way to like try to manifest money and like move through the world. But it's what's interesting is because he is a passive wealth demon. Like, think about anyone who has like passive streams of income. Like, you know, those people like just really don't have to work much. You know what I mean? Because they have some real estate and they don't manage it themselves, or they have an online shop, they don't manage it themselves. There's so much jealousy, and there's such a charge sometimes with the way people, because they're like, oh, it must be nice, not fucking have to do anything, just like lay on a beach all day. And it's like, hey, no one saw what they had to do to get to that point. Because you can't be lazy and get to that point. Like, you know what I mean? But what's interesting is like this passivity can hold this belief that like, well, if I'm making money easily, or if I'm claiming my desires easily, if they're flowing to me without much effort in the end, that somehow this is too easy. I must be lazy. Like again, it can take us through deeper layers of this self-worth piece because there's a lot of conditioning around like money in general, but you only being worthy of that money if you destroyed yourself in pursuit of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is one that is in my life, I'm exceptionally familiar with. I was misdiagnosed all through my 20s, and I ended up, Lyme disease is the proper diagnosis. But by the time I had that diagnosis, I was in so much chronic pain and so much chronic fatigue. I think that the Lyme disease was slowly killing me, to be completely honest. And in order to be able to run a business at that time, I had to massively change how I was doing business. I was seeing clients one-on-one. I had employees. Everybody was seeing clients one-on-one. It was a whole thing. And as my energy continued to decline and decline and decline, I had to change how things were done. And so we changed to a low offer, or a low ticket offer. We put it in a membership site. We launched 3 or 4 times a year. And all of a sudden, I was doing a fraction of the work, making a ton more money, and a huge impact. The impact I was able to make skyrocketed. And at the same time, I'm having self-worth issues because I'm going,
Yeah.
do I deserve all this money if I'm not working? Like, and not, it
Yeah.
wasn't like all this money as in like, oh, retire, you're making tons of money. But like, interesting that I even feel the need to say that. Like, I
Yeah.
feel the need to put a
Yeah, to
disclaimer in there about
justify,
the
you're
amount
like,
of
wait a
money I was
second,
making.
guys, I'm not rich as
Right.
fuck, so don't come for me.
Exactly. And so it's interesting, like how these things are still in there, But so, and I'm sitting on the couch having major self-worth issues because I physically can't get up off the couch and continue to work like I used to. But that was what my body needed, what needed me to rest. And then I was able to recover from that with the correct diagnosis. And just here this month, I had another nice test in. Can you just sit and do nothing when your body requires it of you? Spent
Yeah.
the first 2 weeks of October in bed, sick, even though I
Yeah.
had a million things on my calendar for this month.
Yeah. Well, right. And that's
And
the self-betrayal piece. You could have pushed and
exactly.
pushed and pushed and destroyed yourself, and the universe would have
Right.
forced your hand even harder. So it's like we have to listen.
Right.
But it is interesting
Mm-hmm.
that you were pushed up against a wall. It's not like you were like, oh, I don't feel like doing all this work. And even if you were, that would have also
Mm-hmm.
been okay. You could have been like, you know what? I don't want to work this much. I'm going to restructure my business. And that would have been fine. But
Yeah.
I'm sure the self-worth piece would not have let you even do that. So you had to be pressed between a rock and a hard place to have your
Mm-hmm.
hand forced. And even then, when you had no other choice, you still had a hard time. And this is so common. And this is why people will get sick or destroy themselves and hit a breaking point before they realize they have to operate differently, especially with money and resources and stuff, or just like boundaries and energy management. And it still feels fucking weird, even when you have no
Yeah.
other choice. That's how
And
deep that goes.
even this last 2 weeks, after all this healing that I've done, I was super sick. I have a toddler. And even then, I felt weird being like, asking my parents for extra help, asking my sister for extra help, asking the daycare to take my son extra. Like, I felt weird
Mm-hmm.
calling in the support that I am exceptionally privileged to have when it comes to raising my toddler. And I felt like I was somehow less to call in the support that wants to hang out. Like, everybody
Yeah.
wants to hang out with my son. Okay. It's not like this is some big, huge imposition for his grandparents to take him. Like, they love
Right.
taking him.
Right.
And I still felt weird about it.
It's wild. And this is just like, and this is where there's so many layers and so many layers, but obviously the first step to anything is just that immediate awareness. And so
Right.
it's fascinating to see this. And this is where, as we move through this, sometimes people's lives look completely different. Like I tend to meet like people who are entrepreneurs who are like very overdeveloped in their masculine energy, because that was me. So the
Right.
universe tends to mirror things back because I understand that very well. And that is very beneficial to have a business, to have a decent amount of masculine energy. I'm a manifesting generator. I can have my hands in a lot of shit. I have the capacity
Yeah, me
for it.
too.
But that doesn't mean that I have to operate that way. And so when I
Yeah.
started to kind of like walk myself out of that a little bit, I was hitting up on these things. And I found out that just because I had the capacity to do those things and run a business that way doesn't mean that I necessarily wanted to. And it wasn't until my own hand got forced with various life events that I was like, fuck, I don't want to do that anymore, but what does that mean about me? You know what I mean? And so it's really, really interesting. So just know that anyone listening or watching, wherever you are in your journey, whether it's healing journey, business journey, or other, like just because it looks like that now, and just because you can be resilient in it or navigate it well, it doesn't mean that it has to be that way.
Yeah, it was this month has been, I think I even had this conversation with you a couple weeks ago. I'm like, I have so much to do. Like, I can't believe they're letting me get sick.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, good example of your guides holding you to the fire. Like, okay, you've healed all this stuff. Now, can you actually embody what you've healed? Can you actually do the thing?
Well, and that's the integration piece. And that is part of the why I love working with the infernals, the demons, because when we do a lot of deep healing, especially if that's unguided, meaning like if you're not working with a mentor, if you're not, like, obviously you are, so like this, you're good on this, but anyone listening or watching, like when we're doing a lot of healing work and we don't have like a container or a structure to facilitate that, sometimes what can happen is we can go really deep into the energetic side of things, go really deep into the shadow, and then still feel like there's this missing piece in our life. And that's the integration. Because at the end of the day, let's say you're supposed to have like a witch business, but you have like a severe witch wound and like don't even know that you're a witch. Like we have to do the energetic and the shadow side of things to like uncover those things and heal those things. So your nervous system and your brain and your body can get used to the idea of walking through the world as that version of your most authentic self. But we hit a point then where we can go through all of the past lives where there are witch wounds. But at the end of the day, the integration comes in when you can say, okay, this is who I am and this is what I'm going to do with that. That's the embodiment piece. That's like bringing it from the cerebral understanding into your body, into your cells, into how you fucking show up in the world. And so if you're lacking that integration, you're stunting or oh my God, I'm losing my words. Potentially preventing your healing journey from proceeding because you're not taking the action. And so the demons are masters at integration and embodiment because they immediately give you action steps and they bring you trials and challenges and opportunities to put into motion what you just did in the shadow. So for example, if you're healing a witch wound, the demons may like kind of push you gently into a scenario at like a family barbecue on the weekend where someone asks like something about spirituality and you're going to have a choice. And it may not feel that obvious in the moment, but it is, where you just lie and be like, oh, I can kind of like dismiss it, deflect, like lie, just be like, oh, going to church. Or you can be like, well, here's actually what I'm doing. And again, there's no right or wrong. Like you can do whatever you want to do with that information, but they will immediately provide opportunities as like an opportunity to embody what you're healing. So for me, it's like I could do all that witch wound healing in my shadow, but until I was going to put witch in my Instagram bio, my brand wouldn't exist now, because there was like a series of events that had to unfold that led to deeper layers of embodiment. And this is the missing piece in the spiritual space in terms of ethics. To have an idea of something, just like, oh, like I want to help people. Great. Okay. But like, can you do you walk the talk? Do you embody what it is that you want to do? And this is what Saturn and Pisces, like, not to go down a rabbit hole, but like when Saturn moved into Pisces, it was all about like grounded ethics in a realm that's notoriously like whimsical and watery and ungrounded and mystical. And so like we're seeing a lot of this now in terms of like who's embodied as fuck in their work and who is not.
Yeah. And so, right. So like I have this whole program coming out on the 7 deadly sins, and so much of it is so heavy on that integration piece and like group work to really not just heal it in the shadow, which we need to do, but then also like bring it into day-to-day life and actually see changes and feel better and all the things. And embodiment, which we're going to talk about lust and gluttony next, which are so much about embodiment, is like the ability to actually bring all that shit into your body and like live it. I think that the word embodiment is interesting because everybody's like, oh, we need to embody our thing. You know, what does that even mean though? Like people, like there are so many people who say that, like, oh, you need to embody your teaching, but then they're not, and they can't even describe to you what that means to be embodied. Like
it's funny because being embodied, it's a very grounded, practical,
Right.
tangible thing, but it's portrayed in this really whimsical energy. So when
Yeah.
someone's like, I'm an embodiment
No.
coach, but like what do you embody though? Like, you know, it's like it's,
Right.
and I'm not knocking that. If anyone's listening, I'm not knocking that. Embodiment's so important. There are so many amazing embodiment coaches, but there are also so many people that just like the way that sounds and they like the aesthetics of it, but they don't know what that means necessarily. And it's
I know.
so fucking important. So for example, if I'm going to help people heal the witch wound, you best believe I'm talking about all kinds of taboo occult shit on the internet. That's embodiment. You know, that's
Right.
how you show up in the world. Like, so it's like when people are hiding things about themselves, but then they're like a coach that helps people unlock radical authenticity, like that's a problem.
Yeah. I was trying to find a quick quote, but it's being real slow, so I won't be able to. But again, it has that idea of humility, which we talked about when we talked about pride. The idea of humility and humbleness is supposed to come from being grounded in the first place. Like that is what that word means, is to be able to move through the world in a grounded sense.
And grounded just means connected to your body, connected to the earth,
Right.
non-chaotic, non-like impulsive. It's just like a very like neutral, it's a neutral place to be.
Yeah. Glennon Doyle has a great quote on this. I wish I could find it, but my computer's being stupid, so it's okay.
All right. Well, shall we move on to lust?
Yes. So I think that lust is another one that's fairly obvious for most of us, in that the church has consistently demonized sexuality of all kinds.
Mhm.
You know, even just within the Catholic Church, our priests are still unmarried and supposed to be celibate, and this somehow brings them closer to God. And of course, there's like a whole biblical thing we could go down, which we won't. But St. Augustine was the one who developed that original sin concept, which is a sexuality based concept, coming from the idea that after they ate the fruit, Adam and Eve suddenly realized they were naked. That's how he drew this whole thing together. And that sexuality is the original sin and it's passed on to us through birth. And so all of us have this, according to the church, not me, have this original sin. We were born with the tendency to be sinful, because Eve did this horrible thing, and it is primarily tied in with sex. The interesting thing to me about it is that, according to the church, Jesus came here to live humanity and sin so that we could all be relieved of it. And then went on to say, except for sexuality, Jesus didn't have that. He wasn't sexual. He wasn't that lustful. That was not a thing that he did. And so it's, again, exceptionally hypocritical.
Mm-hmm.
But this is the one that we see in so many, like Lilith holds this one, and Eve, and of course Mary Magdalene. I mean, there are so many beings that can help us to heal this, because it's not just about actual sexuality. It's about creativity. It's about pleasure. It's about being in your body. It's about, I think, more so than any other one, is the human experience sinful, or is the human experience something we came here to do and to be?
Mm-hmm.
And so I find it's both exceptionally obvious and also like there's this deeper meaning to it.
Well, I love that you bring that up, because we'll dive deeper into the lust stuff in a second, but like because of that conditioning around the human experience being inherently sinful, when we step into the spiritual arena with that conditioning and we start to understand that our soul chooses our lives and certain lessons and traumas and things that we're going to experience, our soul is fucking choosing to be here, which means that when we get here, we have traumas and things that are already contracted and ironed out, but there's so much free will, and it gets to also be fun. And I'm going to keep saying this. So like when we get here and we get here in this life, but then we arrive in the spiritual space after an awakening or whatever, and we carry that original wounding, that's where we start to get weird with shit. And that's where we start to be like, you can't eat meat, you can't drink alcohol, you can't eat sugar, you have to like, what? Okay, fine. If you don't like those things, if you have an autoimmune issue, if you're just someone who like doesn't like or should not drink alcohol, fine, don't. But like
We have
these
actually
things
seen
are not
spiritual teachers online.
inherently like fucking bad in any way, shape, or fucking form.
Yes.
Can they be abused? Can you eat too much sugar? Can you drink too much alcohol? Can you do dumb shit? Yeah, but that's not what we're talking about. And so when we carry this belief that certain things are inherently sinful, we have this like purity mindset around like eradicating anything that may be dirty or low vibe and whatever. And it's like, our vibration's real,
Yes.
yeah, but like you're not going to never be sad again in your life. You know, because then that's where we start to get really bypassy and really repressy. And arguably, it's worse to pretend that you're not sad or angry and repress it and kick it into your shadow because you're holding on to the repressed, distorted, low vibration density and storing that into your field versus letting yourself be angry as fuck in a healthy, safe way. You know, like it's the same thing like when you're denying yourself of your desires. You want to fucking drink or you want to eat a cookie, go do it. Like, and so this is where like we get really weird with shit because of that conditioning.
Oh yeah, and I've seen spiritual teachers online be like, if you're going to be spiritual and high vibe and ascended, you can't eat meat or drink alcohol or have sugar. You can't do any of those things. It's like,
right. It's like,
okay,
are
you
going
going
to
to tell me I can't
margarita
dance
and a
too?
steak
Because
and
that's
a
the only
cookie.
one you're missing from like puritanical
Yeah,
teachings.
literally. It's really interesting. And so this is where shit gets weird mentally when we carry in this stuff, but then we pack the lust piece in. You know, that's carnal desires. And so that scares people, especially if you have like, listen, if you have sexual trauma from past lives, etc., there's going to be some extra waters to wade through before you really feel safe embodying this archetype or like working with Asmodeus, who's the demon that represents lust. And so we all arguably have some form of like sexual trauma or conditioning from past lives and or this life. And those are things that people have to wade through. And you'll know when you have to, because it'll either come up in an event in your life or you'll stumble upon it in your shadow, or you'll choose to dive into and explore that aspect of your shadow. But the carnal desire piece is interesting because, again, these desires are kicked to the side. Like sex, money, like these things that are real carnal and real tangible tend to be these things that we're like, ooh, nope, can't have that, can't want that. But like we're in a 3D body for a reason. We're in a dense meat suit for a reason. There are things that we can only experience in said body in this earth that we're supposed to experience pleasure. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the capacity for that emotion. We're supposed to experience lust. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the capacity for that emotion. These things can be abused, though. Can lust destroy your life? Yeah, absolutely. But on the flip side of that coin, being completely detached from your sexuality can also destroy your life in a completely different fashion. And this is the whole missing the mark bit.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's a, again, like, is humanity meant to be lived or not? Because this is like, you can't have new humans.
Right.
Without
right. And
some of this, like,
and from a religious context, that's not the only purpose of leaning into lust either. You know what I mean? And so it's like there is so much conditioning around like, okay, well, I'll lean into it for these purposes when I'm married and this whatever. That's not the only purpose of that. Like there's also this pleasure piece.
Yeah. Well, and the my opinion on this is that the reason that the church needed to demonize this so much, and I love the word demonize now that
I know,
like,
me too.
worked with demons, it brings this whole other like level of into the word, is that not only is it exceptionally powerful for so many reasons, including like bringing new life onto, like, no man can bring new life onto the planet alone. This is not a thing that can happen. But before Christianity really started to take effect, we had all kinds of goddess worship that had sacred sexuality as a core component of their worship and as of the divinity. Within Isis cults, Asherah cults, I mean, all of them had sacred sexuality built into how they did things. And I won't get into it because I would have to be like very meticulous about doing it correctly because I don't want to screw up like ancient Hebrew and things. But when you know what you're looking for, you can find evidence of this within the Bible, and you can find evidence of important male figures in the Bible marrying these priestesses that would have held these sacred sexual rites and all these things. And so you can it's all there if you know what you're looking for. And so the church had to do something. Again, they had to do something. And so this is especially the one that they attribute to Mary Magdalene, and they call her a whore or a prostitute. Now, historically, there's not evidence for that at all. It's made up. And when you look into Mary Magdalene's myth outside of Christianity and how a lot of us have come to experience her and understand her as a priestess of Isis, she probably or perhaps was fulfilling that role of sacred prostitute or sacred sexuality, which is not the same as a person just paying for sex. It had more to do with somebody being able to experience the divine, which you could only do through connecting with the feminine.
Mm-hmm.
So there were all of these, like, religious, spiritual groups that believed men could not interact with the divine without the intermediary of a woman. Now, I'm not saying that that's what we should go back to, or that that's in quotes correct.
Right. But it
I'm
does
just
flip the script a
saying,
lot. It's that,
important to
yeah.
understand that this was a known thing.
Right. Well, and what better way to cap someone's power? If they were viewed, if women were viewed as all powerful in that way, what better way to knock them off the pedestal than to just call them a whore?
Right.
And we see this today in society.
Oh,
You
yeah.
call a woman a whore, you slut shame her, anything that comes out of her
Mhm.
mouth after that is completely invalidated. And that is
Exactly.
how we rob people of their power.
And then on the other side of it, with like a wounded light capacity, we have the Virgin Mother, Mother Mary, who supposedly never her sexuality was just ripped from her.
Mhm.
And everybody in the church is, in order to be a good woman, this is how you are, is like the Mother Mary. Well, she had other kids, first of all. So it's not like she never had sex. There is, and if anybody listening or watching this knows, please tell me. But I heard in a podcast once somebody reference a text somewhere that talks about the original story of the Immaculate Conception being orgasmic. And I can't find it, but I know I heard somebody talk about this. So if anybody knows what this is, please let me know. I need it. And there's a lot of myth and story and experience around even Mother Mary also being one of these priestesses of Isis or Asherah and fulfilling that sacred sex role that Mary Magdalene was. And again, these women were too important to the Christian story to remove. We can't just take them out of the Bible.
Right.
So we have to do something.
Right.
Do something with them to disempower them.
Clip
but
their
they
wings
can
and
really
demonize
come
them
in
instead.
and
Right.
they can help you refine the divinity within your sexuality.
Yeah.
1000%.
So can Asmodeus.
Yeah.
Because that is the demon that represents lust. And so that's just a darker avenue. And so again, for anyone listening, there may be some of you that like never feel called to work with demons, and that's fine. There are other guides that can help you heal these wounds. So I don't want anyone to take away from this that like if you don't work with Asmodeus, your lust wounds will never be healed. Like that's
the
not
same thing
all.
with like Mother Mary. Like you don't have to work with either of the Marys in order to like heal yourself.
Exactly. That's not what we're saying. We're just providing different examples. Having personally worked with a variety of these beings, we're showing you like Asmodeus is like the archetype for that lust piece. But if you don't choose to work with him, that's also fine, because he is one of the, I don't want to say scarier demons, but like he is one of the ones that can be a little bit harsh and a little bit intense. But what was interesting is when I had like personally having developed my overly developed my masculine energy for business and for, hustle culture, etc. My femininity was like fucking rammed into my shadow. And so that part of really severe passive trauma from witch wounding, etc. But when he stepped forward, it was like immediately my sacral chakra was like on fucking fire. I was like, whoa. And so his energy can feel really fucking intense, and he will absolutely mirror back the things that you're either not embodying or you haven't like met or come to terms with. And so what's really interesting is a lot of times if there's a lust wound there for you, this can look like, again, having it be overactive. Like I've had clients who were like, my love triangle affairs are ruining my life. And somebody will step forward and be like, fucking stop with the chaos. And then I'll explain why you're doing that and why this is happening, why this is a loop, etc. for you. But on the flip side, if that's really repressed, he's going to help you unlock that. And that could look like having him help you move through sexual trauma from this life or past lives, help you move through this conditioning to help you really liberate yourself, because our sexuality is a really important piece of ourselves. And if that isn't embodied to the degree that feels good for you,
right,
and that's going to look different for like some people have a sexual awakening and they are fucking then a somatic sex coach and every reel has them on a pole. And that's fine. If that's you, fucking do it.
Great.
But that's not everybody. And I think that there's a fear of like, I don't want to be that. So then therefore I don't want to heal this wound. You don't know what you're going to be on the other side of it. So you might as well just like heal it and meet that version of yourself. That's interesting
because even like within the Christian myths, that those are the options. The options are chaste, virginal mother or prostitute.
Right.
Like
Because
those are
in
the
order
options.
to be in order to be good, you have to be this, or
Right.
you're bad and you're that. Like as if there's no middle ground on this spectrum at all.
Yeah.
And you get to decide how you embody these things. You can heal your lust wounds and have you completely transform your relationship with your sexuality and your femininity if you're a female, or you can there's a million different ways to go about it. And so just know that it's not like it's going to take you down some crazy road, because I think that there's a lot of fear around people like opening Pandora's box and like what they're going to become, and
Which
so I wanted
it
to
brings
say
to
that.
a control, like the inability to lose control, the inability to allow for that.
Yeah. And that's inherently
In
feminine
general
though.
and in other areas of your life outside of what would be considered sexuality is the
Right.
ability to just like let go of control.
Experience and not manage. Yeah. What's interesting is that's inherently feminine though. And so even no matter identify, no matter what your gender is, like everyone has masculine and feminine energies. So if you're someone that likes to manage and control and pack things tightly into a box and a schedule, like the part of you that's meant to experience something and not manage it, that may feel really chaotic, that may feel really unsafe and really scary and ungrounded. And there's like a balance with these things that happen. But just know that if you're afraid to tap into that like unbridled energy, that's a wound there.
Yeah.
And so
I also just want to quickly say, like, you don't, just for everybody, like, in order to heal lust wounds, you don't need a partner. Like, this is not something that you have to be partnered in order to. It doesn't require a second person at all, if that's not something that you have or want.
Correct.
Because I do think that there's some of that where people will be like, well, I have to be in a relationship, or I have to, like, no,
not at all.
This does not require a second person. So.
Not at all. Even just from a healing component, you going into your shadow or the chakras where the traumas and memories are stored has nothing to do with anybody else.
Right.
But then and the healing is supposed to be individual first and foremost, because you can't insert yourself into a dynamic. And obviously we all have relationships. I'm not saying like be a hermit until you're fully healed. That's not what I'm saying. But let's say you want to explore sexuality in a relationship, you have to first explore it with self, healing your relationship to it and the energies that come with it before you insert that into a relationship, if you choose to do that.
Yeah. I was just thinking, having said that, Isis is another one who can really help with that. I don't work with Isis a whole lot, but I have heard from others that she can be very powerful in healing.
I agree. I definitely agree. So. Okay. Do we want to touch on gluttony?
Sure. Right. So this one is supposed to be overeating, but also overconsumption of really anything is the traditional idea of gluttony, right? Is this like just needing to have all? It's actually very close to greed now that I'm saying that out loud, in this idea of needing more, wanting more than you need. But I think deeper impact of gluttony is two pieces, is equating beauty with goodness. And so we need to remain thin and beautiful. And secondly, the fact that we need to be able to trust our bodies in order to be able to heal. And that our psyche can put things into our unconscious, but our body can't do that. And so often, in my experience, what we see or feel or experience as gluttony is almost better equated to a spiritual hunger, where we are trying to solve something in our relationship to food, for a very common one in our relationship to food. So using all the ways we use food to numb, to be happy, to all the things. And look, I love food. Okay. I think that we should all experience food to the fullest. So I fucking agree. Not trashing food, but just as anything, restricting food, eating only certain types of food, overeating food, overeating foods that you know are bad for you to the point where you do start to see physical symptoms. These are all
like if you're lactose intolerant and you pound milk like a mofo because you don't care, like you're gonna have some issues.
Exactly. Like I love sugar, anything sweet, but I know with my medical history, if I overeat it, I will, like, all of my Lyme symptoms will come back.
Right.
So should I personally never eat it? Probably. Which doesn't mean you should never eat it. It just means personally I probably shouldn't.
Right. Right.
but it's really yummy. It's really
Yeah.
yummy.
Yeah.
So I do it
Well, and this
in a
is
healthy
back to
for
like
me way.
the pleasure and enjoyment piece where we engage with these things in ways that
Mhm.
allow us to experience joy and pleasure and fulfillment without completely destroying ourselves. And this is like
Yes.
we as a human species as a whole, we struggle with moderation because everything's become so
Yes.
polarized. So it's like an all or nothing approach with everything. And so this is
Yeah.
where like
Yeah.
that middle line can be dangerous. It's like having a potato chip and stopping at 3 or 5 instead of the entire bag. Like, and where we'll be like, I'm not even going to buy them. So I can't even fucking smell them because I just fucking can't. Instead of being like, how do I exist in moderation and listen to my body to shut off this
Can you
pattern? And
hear
I think
me?
this
Or
is,
are we
I can hear you. Can you hear
all of
me?
a sudden I lost my audio. Hold on a sec. I don't understand what.
Can you
Can you?
hear me?
Okay, I can hear you now. I don't know. Something on my end just all of a sudden went weird. I got you now. I tried to mute
The
myself because
demons were like,
my dogs started barking, and I was like, we don't like not everybody needs to hear my dogs barking.
the demons were like, quick pause. We'll be back.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was saying this is where we start to get into the excess wounds because that's
Mhm.
what gluttony means to me. Like, yes, this is hugely food based, but it's also just like excessive anything, And so
Yes.
it's like, how well do you dance in the realm of moderation? Is it depravity and then complete like insane overindulgence? Like, can you walk
Mhm.
that middle line? Because if not, that is the wound that needs to be healed. And sometimes this is like a discipline thing, sometimes this is a trust thing, and it really depends on the lens that we take this with. But arguably moderation is the hardest because we have to trust ourselves, our brain, our body, our intuition to shut
Mhm.
off at a certain point, meaning following hunger cues, listening, like
Yes.
listening to that internal navigating system. And so if you have repressed everything, if you're dissociated and disconnected, like you're going to miss those cues because they're buried beneath everything that you're trying to numb out. And this is where we start to get into void filling too. We can do this with food, we can do
Mhm.
this with sex, we can do this with alcohol, we can do this with really anything. And so if you're trying to run from yourself or fill voids, you're going to miss the cues that would actually allow you to trust yourself and your body so much more deeply.
And if we're so busy worried about food in any capacity, again, where is our energy to tear down the patriarchy or to heal
Yeah,
or to do
right.
anything else?
Yeah,
Because we're so busy
right,
doing this thing instead.
right. So what's interesting is the demon that represents gluttony is Beelzebub. And having worked with him personally and having a lot of clients that work with him, he steps forward in a variety of ways. It's not always around like gluttony or excess. Oftentimes, he has more, at least this is for my clientele based on what comes up in their shadow, a little bit more of like a warrior archetype. Like he steps in when it's like, let's get shit done. Let's make some fucking money. Let's do this thing. And what's interesting is to me, even though like Beelzebub will step forward in very individual ways for people sometimes, it has this energy of like we can forge this path and light shit on fire because we're not distracted with all this inner turmoil bullshit. Because it's like if you're running from yourself, if you're feeling voids, if you're numbing out, if you like can't do moderation, like how well are you going to forge a path toward anything? You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's interesting because like there are demons that will step forward for very specific ways. And at least within my practice and my clientele, Beelzebub will step forward for a variety of things, sometimes money, sometimes business. And so it's interesting because his scope within my work feels very broad with clients, whereas like Asmodeus or Belial will be a little bit more like nuanced. But it has this overarching energy of like stop running from yourself. Stop chasing your own tail because you're going nowhere on the
Yeah.
path forward.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I have a 2-year-old and we are so conditioned to lose the baby weight after
Mhm.
you have a child. And I didn't worry about it. I just refused to. If you are so busy though, trying to lose weight right after you have a baby and obsessing about the scale, it becomes exceptionally easy to fall into postpartum depression and things because you're focusing on all these other being a mom is hard enough. Um, and so you can't go get all the other things done because you're too focused on this scale thing.
Mhm.
And I can see it even in myself as a new mom. Like I refused to focus on the scale, but it just became very easy to fall into this circular trap of okay, but I had him 9 months ago. Why haven't I lost any weight? I had him why haven't, and you get into this circular trap with it all.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing for me is that I didn't start to lose weight after I had my son until my nervous system calmed the fuck down.
Mm-hmm.
And once my nervous system calmed down, about 18 months after I had him, because that's a whole long story, but I did have issues with depression and things. Once my nervous system calmed down, my weight started to just fall off me personally, because your body wants you to hold weight to keep you safe. What if there's not enough food? You're all stressed about things. What if there's not enough food?
Yeah, right.
But I think it's interesting, just as you were talking about, you know, like forging a path forward, like getting out of that like tail
Chasing
chasing
energy. Yeah.
thing. Like when you're a new mom, it's so easy to get sucked into that chasing. And
Yeah.
having children is supposed to be a powerful thing.
Yeah.
And yet it's constantly shoved down our throats that once you have kids, you're disempowered. Not that everybody should have kids, or you have to have kids in order to be powerful.
Yeah.
It's definitely not a path for everyone, but
Right. No, but I completely
constantly
agree.
punished.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. 1000%. And it's interesting too, because then all the stuff that goes on around us, like numbing, avoiding, chasing our tail, prevents you from being present in whatever it is that you did choose to do, whatever it is you do desire to experience. So it's an interesting concept.
Yeah. And again, I mean, I think that like Eve, I have two I want to talk about quickly, because Eve she shows up for the 7 deadly sins all the time, because for me, she's really, again, about shame and about just, can we just please like purge the shame right out of you so we can get on to the next thing? And of course, with gluttony, like she had the entire garden. Why did she also need the fruit? But I think that story brings us back to the idea of using food to numb a spiritual hunger, because yes, she was in the garden and she was healthy and she was happy or whatever. Like she had all that else could she possibly need. But when you're in that situation, it's not like it's real, but it's not real. And so by eating the fruit and stepping out of the garden, she got to have the entire experience of humanity, which means the entire experience of divinity. And she couldn't have that without eating the fruit. So it wasn't really about, wanting something she didn't need. It's not about the food. It's not about the fruit. It's about the spiritual piece beneath the fruit.
I also think that this comes down to people telling people what they do and don't need, though. Because how many times if you're like someone who has a grand vision and massive desires that trigger other people, the first thing that will come out of someone who's disempowered's mouth is, well, why do you need that when you have all this? Like, as if like, how dare you want more? How dare you? And it's interesting because then this has so much more to do with allowing ourselves to truly desire and allowing ourselves to understand where that desire comes from. Because desire from void filling to run and numb is very different than desire for like soul yearning, like that when your soul is yearning for something big. Those two things are very different. And this is a very individual piece, because what people want is highly individual. And so something that somebody desires may terrify somebody else. And okay, fine, cool, whatever.
Yeah. I'll just leave us with one more thing on gluttony. And that it also, as we kind of talked about at the beginning, is that beauty has been related to goodness, but not too much beauty, because that's vanity. Okay. And one of the most demonized female characters in the Bible is Jezebel. To the point that the name Jezebel has become like synonymous with like bad and slimy and manipulative. And there's a whole thing with, she was a priestess of Asherah. This was very common for when you married somebody in a different kingdom, you were allowed to bring your spiritual stuff with you. Like this was not outside the realm of like normal at the time. But when the king died, her last act before they threw her from her window was to put on all her makeup and her crown, like to fully adorn herself. And so while we can certainly get trapped in like, are you trapped in like beauty equals goodness? Like we don't want to do that. But also like sacred adornment has a wildly, just hugely long history of something that humans do, like to like help them communicate with the divine. Is like, it's a sacred act to adorn yourself with all these beautiful things. And so she adorned herself with all of her stuff, and she was confident right up until the moment that they threw her out the window, which has that's how she met her end. So they throw her out the window, and forever her legacy in the Western world has been that she like manipulated the king away from God and towards the demon Baal and Asherah. And even in her last moments, she was so like prideful in things that she adorned herself with beauty, and like it's been completely manipulated. Like her story, as all stories, is told by the victor. In this case, that was her opposer, and so we only have that side of her. But Jezebel, I think she probably falls into the category of like a darker being, technically. Although
Well,
I
it's like,
find her
how
to be very
rebellious is that? You know what I mean?
balanced, but
It's interesting
yeah,
though, because how rebellious is that? You're going to meet an untimely death. And
right,
instead of being hysterical and pleading for your life, you're going to be a fucking boss about it. Like that,
right.
that's rebellious.
You're going to show your power right up until the last
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah.
And so it was, but she was vain for doing that. And she was manipulative when she stole the king, I mean, all the
Yeah.
things.
Right.
But she
Right.
can be really powerful for people to connect with for all of those things as
Mhm.
well.
I love that.
So
I love that you
she's
brought that
just
up.
new for me personally, but like,
I love it. All right. Last
last
but
but
not
not least.
least, we have anger/wrath. They're referred to the same shit.
Yeah.
And this sin is represented by none other than Satan himself. And this is going to probably trigger all of you because I know so many people that like work with demons but still like choke when they say the word Satan because there's just so much charge around it. And so we're just going to go out with a bang right now. Do you want to kick us off with this sin?
So of course, I mean, like I am one who has struggled with anger, and I come from a long family line that struggled with anger. And it absolutely, when we are too angry for unnecessary reasons, it can absolutely burn our lives down. However, I think that when we start to talk about anger, it's another one that's really important to get underneath because we feel angry when our needs are going unmet.
Mm-hmm.
Almost always, if we can get beneath the anger, we can find a need that is either actually being unmet or because of our shadow, we just perceive it as being unmet.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that has an interesting like dichotomy, if that's the word I'm looking for, because in women, anger is a horrible thing to feel. You're never allowed to feel angry. Men have managed to convince us all that they are men, not like individual men listening to this, like the patriarchy guys,
Mm-hmm.
but like have managed to convince the world that men are the less emotional of the sexes because they have managed to rebrand anger as not not an emotion.
Well, and it's interesting too, though, because anger kills men. Men have
Oh
higher
yeah.
rates of homicide, suicide, addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And so they've been convinced that they are not emotional. And they've been convinced that if
Yes.
they do dip a toe in the waters of emotion, the only thing that is acceptable for them to feel and display is rage. God forbid they feel sad. God forbid they feel hurt. And it's interesting because this is how the patriarchy serves nobody. Like
Yeah.
we see men being on top because of the way the masculine energy is promoted, but it's destroying them the way it's destroying everybody
Oh yeah.
else.
And we can get to sadness if you have 1 minute after anger.
Mhm. It's interesting though, because when we repress anger, we then weaponize it. And that's what makes it unsafe. If you are a highly volatile person with so much repressed rage, you are a loaded gun just waiting to go off. And that's when you're going to hurt people. Anger in itself is not dangerous. It is one of the most powerful catalysts for radical change. If you betray yourself fucking every day of your life, you will hit a point where you hit sacred rage. And that is going to give you the strength and
Mm-hmm.
release all of the fucks in terms of making other people inconvenienced so that you can finally choose your goddamn self. And so we have to feel this. But
Mm-hmm.
when left unchecked, when kicked into our shadow and it builds and builds and builds, that's when it destroys. People who have a healthy relationship with their anger will not hurt anybody amidst their anger. It's when we repress it that we weaponize it.
Yeah. Well, societally, like I have a son and I'm trying to figure out how to teach him to manage his anger because I was taught not to be angry. Okay, well, that's not healthy.
Yeah. Well,
So
no,
how
because
do
we experience anger in human bodies, so we
like
gotta
how
dance
do
with
we
it a little.
so I need to teach him how to express anger, and I don't even have a good role model for that. I don't even know what that looks like.
Yeah.
But I do think so. In her book Mary Magdalene Revealed, Megan Watterson has a quote where she says about anger that, as with all the powers, it isn't the power itself that's harmful. It's the presence of the power and the absence of the soul. And I
Mhm.
think that wraps anger up beautifully, because it isn't the anger that's the problem. It's when you act from anger from only your ego and not
Mhm.
also your soul or your, higher self, or whatever you want to call that.
I completely agree. And then that also takes us back to our power wounds. If you're grounded in a
Mhm.
heart-centered place, you can be fully in your power, expressing every single emotion. That's going to be wildly different than somebody's ungrounded, closed heart space, disconnected from their soul, just feeling all types of shit and doing all types of shit. So
Yeah.
what's interesting is I love that we say this one for last, because anger is so demonized because of how many
Mhm.
of us are traumatized by people who have weaponized anger from their own trauma and their own pain and their own repression. But then also the being that it represents this is equally as demonized, like more demonized even, because there's so much conditioning around this being so fucking evil and so vile, etc., to the
Mhm.
point where there are so many people who will work with demons and never stumble across Satan as his own individual being, to the point where it would be easy to assume that he does not exist. And I believed that for a really long time, until some of my clients had him step forward and he would give other names. He's just like, you don't have to say my name if it scares you. But this being, again, is not like we've been conditioned to believe. And I know all the Christians are going to come at me and be like, you're being manipulated and this and that. But like at the end of the day, if you know yourself, and this is where we have to come back to the nervous system piece and the self trust piece, if you trust yourself and your soul so deeply, you are the captain of your own ship. Doesn't fucking matter what conditioning, what stories, what people are projecting onto you or telling you to do or how you should feel. If you trust yourself, you know how you feel in the presence of these beings. Every single being, no matter how dark, no matter how light, has something to teach you. And so this being is adversary, etc., because like what better energy to stand in your power or push up against something that is oppressive? Like you can't do that from a place of hopelessness. You can't do that from a place of numbing your emotions. Sometimes you got to get angry, and this being will help remind you of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and anger, you can't make radical change if you can't feel angry about the things that aren't right
Mhm.
with the world.
Yeah.
And so, of course, if the church was trying to control people, this would make sense. Don't be angry. That's a whole big issue,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Mhm.
And because we have so been taught like not to feel anger, which isn't a thing that can happen. One of the things I've noticed in myself, because you mentioned like nervous system and being grounded and stuff, and you'll laugh because you know me. A few weeks ago, I had this big realization, okay, for myself at home, that what I label as anger a lot of the time is really just me being overstimulated. Like
Yeah.
my nervous system, because I have a toddler and I have dogs and I have a husband and we work from home, and there are moments where like all of it is happening all the time and I can only handle a very small amount of like noise at once. I will snap at somebody or a dog or something and think, oh my God, I'm such an angry person. Like, why do I have to be so angry all the time? And I was like, all of a sudden, I was like, yeah, you're not angry. You're just like overstimulated.
Yeah.
Just like how envy, we can't identify envy. And so we can't identify what we want. Like, if you can't even identify the difference between anger and overstimulation, how are you
Yeah.
supposed to identify when the anger is leading you towards something important
Mhm.
versus like your nervous system is having a minute and just needs everything to stop for a second?
Yeah. Well, right. And this is where like we can't kick everything into one box.
Right.
You know, like human beings are masters at compartmentalizing everything and like labeling everything. Like, not everything is black or white. Like, nothing is black or white, you know? And so that's a
Yeah.
prime example of also not taking things on as an identity. You can experience
Mhm.
anger in healthy ways and sacred ways, in unhealthy ways, but that still doesn't make you an angry person. We all
Yeah.
have the capacity to feel anger. We're all going to feel anger. It's what we do with that anger that matters, but don't wear that as an identity.
Yeah,
You know, like
exactly.
it's just really interesting the things that we continue to be conditioned to do
Yeah.
to take ourselves out of our power. Because it's like, if you're angry, how, like, it's interesting because if you're angry, depending on how you express anger in your life, people may expect that of you. People may be blindsided by it. You may be gaslit a little bit. It's like very interesting when we step into that healthy rage, the way people will engage with it. And so if we're invalidating it and gaslighting it and putting it back on ourselves, like it's going to be really hard for you to feel empowered in that emotion and do what you need to do. Like
Yeah.
sometimes we hit anger, we're at our breaking point and things need to change. Like it's really important. We have these emotions for a reason. We're meant to experience them for a reason. It's not low vibe to be mad. What is low vibe is to repress it all, pretend like you're not, abuse the people in your life because you don't want to face it. That's low vibe.
Yeah. There are no low vibe emotions.
Mhm.
Okay. But stopping them. So if you go back to the flowing water example,
Mhm.
water has to move. And if it doesn't move, it gets slimy and gross.
Yeah.
So
1000%.
Yeah.
Yeah. We
So if
made
you
it
have-
through all 7.
we have all 7, but if you have one more minute, there were originally 8 vices.
Go for it.
So that's where we actually do hit up on sadness. So originally in the 8 inner demons or whatever that this Evagrius Ponticus came up with, he had 8 evil thoughts, and one of them was sadness. And I find it really fascinating that when Pope Gregory changed it to 7, first of all, he needed it to fit Mary's story. But which one did he leave off? And that was sadness. Because if you're feeling too sad all the time, you can't, and no anger, it's again really easy to control you. But teaching, so we've actually been like allowed to feel sad, but men haven't been allowed to feel sad. And so it's
Yeah.
interesting that there's actually this whole 8th sin that was never formally created and still has its claws into everybody. And so it's just food for thought.
It's
People
interesting.
start
I love that
thinking
you brought that up because sadness is a very difficult place to take action from. If we're experiencing
Yes.
grief, sadness, hopelessness, you can't really do shit from that energy. So it makes sense why they would be like, this one
Yeah.
stays, but not for this population.
Right. And if
Because
you
that's going to
can't
kick
feel
them into
sadness, you can't get the help you need. You can't empathize with people. You can't.
Well, right. You can't, you're going to your heart space is going to
No.
close and you're going to be a giant dick to people because you're not going to understand what they're feeling. But what's interesting though is that that will kick you further into rage because most of the time when people have excessive rage, underneath that is excessive grief.
Yes.
And
Anger
rage
is
just feels like the
almost always
stronger
hiding
Yeah.
some other emotion. It is
fear,
far easier to
grief.
feel angry than it is to feel sad, to feel shame, to feel
Mhm.
anything other than happy. Anger is really the next easiest emotion to deal with, especially because it makes it possible for it to be someone else's fault instead of ours, depending on the situation we're looking at.
1000%. I couldn't agree more.
So yeah, there's kind of an 8th one snuck in there.
I love it. That was perfect. Well, we made it through all 7. So
Yes.
do you want to quickly just talk about your program that's coming up?
Yeah, so I'm going to have a program coming out very soon. Hopefully by the time this is posted, there will be formal information and announcements. But it is completely about the Eve wound and unraveling these 7 deadly sins. So it's a small group program because I think that there is a powerful magic to be had in a small group container for shadow work. You know, one-on-one stuff is brilliant and amazing, and I do one-on-one stuff with Kristen regularly. But I also remember the first time I ever sat in a group program with a different mentor, and I only bought her group program because I couldn't afford her one-on-one mentorship at the time. And processing the shame and the emotions with other women in a safe container heals your nervous system. It 1000% heals you. And so we're going to go through, you know, the Eve wound, which is the wound that tells us we're unworthy. It's the wound that holds the shame from all 7 of these sins. We're going to go through each one. It's going to be a 12-week program. And there is deep shadow work, and there is lots of integration, and there is group, you know, processing and all the things. And I am super excited about it.
I'm so excited for you. It's going to be amazing.
Yeah. And Eve has just come in like a freight train. Like, okay, here's the program. Here's the rest of it. Like, let's do this. Let's go.
I love it. I'm
She
so
has
excited
got some
for you.
powerful medicine to share with people that has been hidden for a very long time. So
I'm so excited. I can't wait. It's going to be so epic for you.
And then you obviously have the demon programs, and we'll probably hit up on demons in my program as well. But
yes. So yeah, if you guys want to dive deep into shadow work with demons, then you know where to find me. Lots of different offerings for that. Intro to demon programs, demon memberships, all the demon things.
Yes. So all the links will be wherever the links go, depending on where you are watching or listening to this. So
Perfect. Well, this was so much fun. We're going to have to do it again.
this is a lot. We were up like 5 times. We're like, that could be its own podcast.
I love it.
So if you want to learn more about working with the Infernals, Kristen has agreed to come back on the channel and do a super great 101 for us. So once that's posted, I'll make sure the link is down below. It will probably be coming very end of November, maybe early December, so stay tuned for that if you're interested in learning more about the Goetic Infernals. Now you can also find all of Kristen's information below, her Instagram, her podcast, her website, all that stuff. She's got tons of great podcast episodes all about the Goetic Infernals and the Witch Wound and all of that stuff. And again, you can find all the information on my new program, Reclaiming Eve, a 90-day group shadow work program. I think I said in this video that it was 12 weeks. It's actually going to be 13 weeks, which makes it 91 days. And we are going to go through the 7 deadly sins. We're going to heal the shame. We're going to work with Eve. We're going to do all the things. And you can find all that information below. Do not hesitate to reach out if you have any questions about it. I hope that you enjoyed this very long conversation, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.